It's God. Okay. It's God. Ba ba.
A very common question I get asked due to my area of study and interest in issues related to early Christian manuscripts and textual issues with the Bible is in regard to the issue of the longer ending of Mark's gospel. Because if you turn in a modern Bible translation to the end of Mark's gospel, you're going to see something a little bit unusual going on partway through chapter 16. For example, the New International Version has a blank space and then a line, and then in square brackets it says, the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20, followed by a space, and then the text continues. The CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, has the same space and line format, but in its note says some of the earliest manuscripts conclude with 16:8. And this is the pattern you'll see consistently throughout modern English Bibles. So, what's going on here? Well, in answering this question, let me start by moving from the known to the unknown. Mark 16, 9 through 20 is found in nearly every New Testament manuscript and is the single longest textual variant in the New Testament. However, it is missing from two very significant manuscripts, Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. And these are significant because Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are our earliest witnesses to the end of Mark. So we actually have manuscripts of Mark, like P45, that are older than Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, but they don't have this latter half of Mark in particular. It's just missing from these documents. And that's extremely common. If you simply just think about a codex, what we would call a book, the beginning and the ends are the most vulnerable places, right? You can see, like, you can imagine that the most exposed to the elements, to wear, to those kinds of things, is the beginning and the ends of a book. So we have a lot of middles of books, but we tend to more often than not miss the beginnings and the ends, and this is especially true when we're dealing with documents that are 1,000+ years old and tend to have very little evidence to begin with, the further we go back. So the first time that we have a copy of Mark, which includes the longer ending, is in Codex Alexandrinus from the 5th century. Now, you can go online and see all three of these manuscripts, Codex Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Alexandrinus. They've all been digitized, and high-resolution images are available to the public. But due to my academic work, I have facsimile copies of these documents, or at least I have the entirety of the New Testament of Alexandrinus here that I've purchased myself from the British Library. I also have Codex Vaticanus of the New Testament here, and the Clementine epistles are in there. And then I have Codex, the entirety of Codex Sinaiticus. So I have both, the Old and New Testament,
Welcome,
along with all
welcome,
the other
welcome.
books that are included within Codex Sinaiticus. So those are 3 manuscript
List texts. They're just not there. Did I lose? I lost you guys. Strange. Maybe I should put my bitrate down. Oh well.
can draw from both the non-existence as well as the existence of something like Mark 16, 9 through 20 to help you understand and navigate this particular textual idiosyncrasy when it comes to the Bible, because there's a lot of confusion about this particular issue. So first, cards on the table, I do not think Mark 16, 9 through 20 is original. I don't think Mark wrote it, and therefore, I don't think it's inspired scripture. And that's the majority position of textual scholars who look and
16, 9 through 20. Interesting.
analyze the data on this issue. But there is debate. And so I don't want to make it sound like nobody thinks it's original. There are a few who argue for the originality of this particular passage to being original to Mark. Given that, what do we see when we look at these manuscripts? Well, Vaticanus in particular is very important in this discussion, because while it does not include the longer ending of Mark, we do find something that is worth taking note of. And that's what I want to highlight for a minute here. Vaticanus is a 3-column codex. At the end of Mark, we find that scribes leave the 3rd column blank. Nowhere else do the copyists of Vaticanus leave any other blank columns in the New Testament text. So for example, here is the end of Matthew. You can see the scribe finishes the gospel partway through a column and then starts the beginning of Mark's gospel at the beginning of the next column. With Luke, the scribe is able to comfortably finish the book at the end of the column and then gives the gospel notation comfortably at the end and picks up with John in the next column. John ends at the beginning of the first column, has the title notation, and then the book of Acts starts. Here is Acts, followed by the Epistle of James, and so on and so forth. Nowhere in the entirety of Vaticanus's New Testament do we ever see anything other than when the book is finished, the next book immediately starts in the following column. Blank spaces, of course, at times, but only in the column where the book ends, right? So the rest of the column is left blank, and then the next book is immediately started in the next column. The only place in the entirety of Codex Vaticanus's New Testament where an entire blank column is left is at the end of Mark. On top of that, if we account for the average space between the letters, the average amount of words per column, and the approximate letter size for the scribe who wrote the Gospel of Mark, and we factor all that in and fill in the gap with a reconstructed text, 16, 9 through 20, and the standard title inscription for the Gospel according to Mark fits exactly in the space left at the end of Mark in Codex Vaticanus. I think that's very important to take note of. For me personally, at minimum, I believe this points to the scribes of Vaticanus's New Testament knowing about a further reading, they themselves not believing that that reading was original, but nonetheless doing their due diligence in leaving the appropriate amount of space for a potential later scribe who maybe had more available data to point to the text's authenticity to write it in. I think that's important. Now, we also find a space at the end of Codex Sinaiticus. However, we cannot convey the same sort of scribal anomaly that we see in Vaticanus, because while Sinaiticus has a space, that space is neither unusual as it goes for other endings of other books in its New Testament text, nor does it do what Vaticanus does with leaving the completely unique blank column. But, and there is a but here, when you get into the nitty-gritty of Sinaiticus, you do actually find something going on with the ending of Mark's gospel. Particularly, the text of Mark, chapter 15, verses 54 to chapter 16, verses 8, and then the beginning of Luke, Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 56, are not written by the scribe of the pages before and after. And we know this based on comprehensive analysis of the handwriting by individuals who focus on that. They're called paleographers. And we can analyze this in what we call the scribal hand of the copyist. And I want you to stay with me here because I'm going to get technical for a minute. But although originally the scribe wrote at a rate of 635 letters per column, in Luke, he drastically compressed his lettering at a rate of 690 letters per column. But near the end of Mark, we see the opposite being done. He expanded his letters in the first column of the third page. And because of this, the scribe would not have reached the end of verse 8 in this column. And effectively, if they had stayed with the amount of space they usually would have had, they would have had an entire column blank. So the scribe would not have reached the end of verse 8 in this column, leaving the entire next column blank. But the scribe clearly doesn't want to do that. So he not only expanded his lettering, but also made this decorative scribal marker at the end, what some textual scholars have called distinctively emphatic. And this, I think we can see that, here's a scribal marker at the end of Matthew. It measures about 2 centimeters in length. Luke has no scribal marker at the end of his gospel in Sinaiticus. John's marker in Sinaiticus is also 2 centimeters, matching Matthew's. But Mark's is not only more decorative in style, but measures 6 centimeters in length. It's more than twice the size of the other decorative markers we find, particularly in the Gospels. So when we are looking at Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, our earliest witnesses to the ending of Mark, we see that they're missing this passage, but I also think there's ground to at least admit that both have unique idiosyncrasies when it comes to this particular passage that indicate a relatively strong argument in my mind that the scribes were aware of additional material after verse 8, and though decide not to include it for, I think, the right reasons, because I don't think it's original, they indicate that something is going on in the exemplars that they are using, and that they themselves are likewise copying. And I would argue that even when we move to Codex Alexandrinus, our earliest example of it being included, that particular manuscript, though it does include Mark 16, 9 through 20, as our first witness historically to that text, we see the copyists likewise making an emphatic decorative design that both differs significantly from the ending of the other Gospels and is larger. Is this up for debate? Of course. Textual scholars go back and forth on this stuff and have, if you look at, say, the textual commentaries by individuals like Tommy Wasserman and Bruce Metzger and Philip Comfort, Brent Nongbury, all of these scholars they go back and forth on these issues. So there are consensuses on this, something like, the longer ending of Mark not being original. But even though there is debate, I think even the debate recognizes that there's something going on within the endings of these particular Gospels and something very different going on when we look at Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Alexandrinus in regards to the ending of Mark that indicates that the scribes are themselves aware of idiosyncrasies going on in the manuscripts that they are copying from. And let me also note that my area of research is in what's called paratextual features. So these are the types of scribal markers, the things that we're looking at that I'm describing in this video. These are my bread and butter. I spend a great deal of my time
welcome
throughout the week, my day.
I'm just doing a little bit of my personal curiosity, but if you have any questions or thoughts, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'm also going to I'm going to put the Discord link invite down. This is something I've always been curious about, though. There's this quote of note in all of our Bibles at the end of Mark that sorry, what chapter was it? 16, 9 through 20. So this part of Mark, which interestingly is the only part. If this were not the inspired word of Scripture, this would be the only gospel which does not include the resurrection account. So Mark would end here. And they went out quickly and fled from the sepulchre, for they trembled and were amazed. Neither said they anything to any man, for they were afraid. I mean, I guess the resurrection is still mentioned, but this sort of like post, description would not be, which would be interesting. I think there's still reason to, believe that this account is interesting or should be read. I don't think this would say that there was no resurrection, certainly. But I was just curious about what the truth of this, uncertainty about those last verses is about. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was going to open Discord for you. Ramblings. Create that invite there. Throw that down there. And if there's no questions, no comments, I think I'll just kind of finish up this video. Actually, I'm kind of interested. Yeah, what are the oldest
Hi, this is Matt
Bible
Baker. Today I'm going to
manuscripts?
show you some of the oldest Bible manuscripts discovered so far. In my series on Who Wrote the Bible, I talked a lot about when each book of the Bible was written. However, keep in mind that in no case do we have the original versions of those books. What we have instead are manuscripts, which are copies or copies of copies that usually date to hundreds of years after the originals. So how old are the manuscripts that we have, and how reliable are they? Well, that's what we're going to find out. But first, let me tell you about our sponsor, MyHeritage. If you want to learn more about your family's history,
All right, go ahead and check out MyHeritage for this guy if you so please. But, yeah.
talking about them in the form of a top 10 countdown. So coming in at number 10 is the Masoretic text,
Right.
represented by two very important manuscripts, Codex Aleppo and Codex Leningradensis. Up until 1947, Codex Aleppo was the oldest complete copy of the Tanakh in Hebrew, which is what Christians call the Old Testament. So originally, it included the complete Torah, the prophets, and the writings. For many centuries, this manuscript was kept at the Central Synagogue in Aleppo, Syria. However, in 1947, during anti-Jewish riots, it went missing. It resurfaced about a decade later in Israel, but when it did, only 60% of the manuscript remained. That surviving 60% is
that
now
horrible?
located in Jerusalem at the Israel Museum.
It's crazy how much people go like, oh, well, we don't even have the original text, so why do you trust it? It's like, so paper and history do not go well together. Between riots and like just normal weather patterns and like degradation and what is that called? Decomposition. Like paper just does not hold up well in history. It's an interesting question. Will our digital records hold up better than paper if we are somehow wiped out or the worst happens? I don't know. And it seems like paper might actually hold up better than my hard drive or whatever, or the YouTube servers. I guess that remains to be seen. But yeah, it's not, we basically have no original text from history. Like all the Greek plays, Plato, Aristotle, all these people were working with copies of copies of copies. But the good thing is that people were damn good at making copies back then. They still are now, but that's because we have printers. So the Masoretic text, this is a very famous one. I've definitely heard of this. I did not know that it had been destroyed partially, 40% of it, in 1947. That's not that long ago at all. That's horrible.
It dates to around the year 920 CE and was created by a group of Jewish scribes known as the Masoretes, hence the name the Masoretic text. But since the Aleppo Codex is no longer complete, the oldest complete copy of the Masoretic text is now Codex Leningradensis, located in St. Petersburg, Russia, which was formerly known as Leningrad. The Leningrad Codex dates to the year 1008, so not quite as old as the Aleppo Codex, but
Pretty old,
still more than 1,000 years old. However, as we learned in the Who Wrote the Bible series, most of the Tanakh was written between the years 650 and 350 BCE, which means that the Leningrad Codex is actually closer in time to us today than it is to the original authors of its content. Now, please note that the Masoretic text is not the oldest copy of the Tanakh. It's the oldest complete copy in the original Hebrew. The Septuagint, which is older, is also a complete copy of the Tanakh, but it's written in Greek, not in Hebrew. And then, of course, there are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are even older. They are written in Hebrew, but they are not complete. So
I got to see those recently at the Reagan Library. It was incredible. And a lot of great history surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were also just found in like the 50s or the late 40s. It's crazy how that history is still happening. We're still so. From my understanding, the Masoretic text is the oldest. Obviously, we just learned this complete copy in Hebrew of the Old Testament. What we call the Old Testament, the Tanakh, for the Israelites, the Jews, and this is written around 920. And then we have this two different sort of codexes that are these copies. And so we have one in 920 and 1008, and you go, wait a second, that's over like 1,500 years after the text was supposed to have been created, transcribed, etc. The interesting thing about and maybe he'll get into this, the Dead Sea Scrolls, is that those were scribed more in the first century, is my understanding. So between 1 and 100 CE. So that's 1,000 years difference. And something interesting about that is that the great Isaiah scroll, which has I think it either has all of or most of the book of Isaiah, is for all intents and purposes identical to the copy we have from 920, basically 1,000 years later, which means that the oral tradition over the following 900 years is pretty darn accurate. And so we can assume that the oral tradition for the previous, 600, 900, whatever, however many years it was, is pretty darn accurate. So just because this comes so much later doesn't mean we have reason to discredit it as the authentic word that was passed down from the original authors I can't remember exactly what time period we're talking about, but 600 to 900s BC. So
looking for the oldest complete copy of the Tanakh, or Old Testament, in Hebrew, that would be the Masoretic text, represented nowadays by Codex Leningradensis. This is the text that provides the foundation for the Old Testament section in every modern translation of the Bible. Okay, coming in at number 9 are the four great uncials: Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Alexandrinus, and Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. These
what
four
great names: Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Alexandrinus. They're awesome.
manuscripts were created by early Christians and thus contain both the Old Testament written in Greek, known as the Septuagint, or LXX for short, as well as the New Testament, including the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Pauline epistles, and the other New Testament books. All, of course, are written in Greek, and some also include several apocryphal books. So basically, these four manuscripts are the only four copies of the complete Bible that have survived from ancient times. They are called uncials because they are written in uppercase letters. Of the four, Codex Vaticanus is probably the oldest, dating to around 325 CE. It gets its name from the fact that it has been kept at the Vatican since the 1440s. Nowadays, however, anyone in the world can view it using the Vatican's online digital library.
Wow.
I'll leave a
Look at
link to it in the description. The next oldest of the four is Codex Sinaiticus, dating to around 350 CE. It was rediscovered in 1844.
So the theory here is that this is not the first time these things were written down, just that we do not have the original copies written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or I guess more accurately, the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We don't know exactly who those are. I believe that it is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I feel like I've heard that's what the scholarship supports, that these were at least, I want to say, John and Mark, I want to say, were almost definitely disciples of Jesus. But I feel like all four of them easily could have been. And then the thing is, it's like they would have written, the argument is that they would have written their original copies of the gospel in this area, 1 to 100 CE. So they put Mark usually around like 60 to 70 CE. And then I think it goes Matthew and Luke are more like, 75 to 80, 85 CE. And then they often put John at around 90 to 100 CE. But, of course, there are people that argue for earlier datings of all these things. And the real argument is that they all come from, the moments after the resurrection of Christ, because it's an oral tradition. And we talked about how oral traditions can be accurately passed on over long periods of time. But we don't even need a long period of time. We just need one generation to explain how we get an accurate historical description of the life of Jesus from the original disciples. So it's interesting. It's important. This is not the oldest. This would not be the first time these things were written down. These would be copies from the original, like 200 years before. And it's not like a copy that like they're making up. Like they're working hard to maintain the exact wording and the exact meaning that was being conveyed in the 60s CE, not the 1960s, because this is their religion. This is, heaven and hell hinge on this sort of accurate transcription.
At a monastery in the Sinai Peninsula, but is now primarily housed at the British Library in London. You can view this one online too. Again, I'll leave a link in the description. The other two, Codex Alexandrinus and Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, were both likely created in Alexandria, Egypt during the early 400s CE, but both eventually wound up in Constantinople. However, from there, they wound up in the hands of the British and the French, respectively, and thus today can be found in London and Paris. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the Old Testament portions of these manuscripts are actually quite a bit older than the Masoretic text. However, they are written in Greek, which means that they are actually translations of the original Hebrew. The Greek version is called the Septuagint, or LXX, because the original Torah portion was said to have been translated by 70 Jewish scribes back in the Ptolemaic period. Now, when the Greek Septuagint is compared to the Hebrew Masoretic text, there are some minor differences. This has led to some debate over which one is closer to the original. On the one hand, the Septuagint manuscripts are much older, but on the other hand, they are not in the original Hebrew. Generally speaking, the Masoretic text is seen as being the more authoritative one, with differences from the Septuagint being mentioned in the footnotes in many modern translations. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, the four great uncials represent the oldest complete versions of all 27 books put together. However, as we're about to see, when it comes to each individual book, we do have versions that are even older. Thus, when it comes to the standard Greek text that is used as the foundation for most modern translations, none of these codices are used alone in the same way that Codex Leningradensis is for the Old Testament. Instead, most scholars today use what's called the Nestle-Aland text, which is a version of the Greek New Testament made about 100 years ago by comparing all the various manuscripts available and figuring out what the original text was most likely to be. Okay, moving along to number 8, the Bodmer Papyri. This is a collection of many manuscripts purchased in 1931 in Egypt by an antiquities collector named Martin Bodmer. Included in this set are P66, an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John, and P75, an almost complete copy of Luke, as well as half of John. Both date to the early 200s CE, making them at least 100 years older than the versions of the Gospels included in the 4 Great Unseals. So these two Bodmer papyri in particular are notable in that they represent the oldest, mostly complete copies of a Gospel. Nowadays, P66 is located in Switzerland and P75 is at the Vatican. Also included in the Bodmer papyri is a good portion of the Book of Psalms in Greek, as well as 1st and 2nd Peter, several apocryphal books, and even a bit of Homer's Iliad. Coming in at number 7 is another large collection of manuscripts known as the Chester Beatty Papyri, named yet again after a collector of antiquities. Most of these were also rediscovered in Egypt, but in this case they were brought to Dublin, Ireland, where they are housed to this day, although a few key pages ended up at the University of Michigan. Included in the Chester Beatty collection is a manuscript called P46, which is around the same age as the two Bodmer manuscripts I mentioned. However, in this case, P46 represents the oldest, mostly complete copy we have of the Pauline epistles. The collection also includes partial copies of other books, both from the Septuagint and the New Testament. Number 6 is the Magdalene fragments, also known as P64 and P67. These are all tiny pieces from a now lost copy of the Gospel of Matthew. They were found in Egypt in 1901, but are now located at Magdalene College in Oxford.
It's fascinating. Look at this. I wonder when this was written.
Hence their name. It is possible that these fragments are even older than the oldest manuscripts in the Bodmer and Chester Beatty collections. At one point, they were even thought to perhaps date all the way to the 1st century. However, most scholars now place them in the 2nd century, if not the 3rd. At number 5, we have the Oxyrhynchus papyri, a massive collection of manuscripts discovered in Egypt in 1898. They are named after the city of Oxyrhynchus, where they were found, which was once the 3rd largest city in Egypt. 90% of the documents were actually stuff that most of us would find quite boring, like census returns and tax assessments. But there were also texts from famous Greek writers such as Sophocles, Sappho, Euripides, and even Aristotle. And of course, there were bits and pieces from the Greek Bible. Most important are P90, a section from John, and P104, a section from Matthew. These both date to around 150 CE and are thus the 2nd and 3rd earliest New Testament fragments found so far. The earliest New Testament fragment comes in at number 4. It's known as the Rylands Papyrus, or P52. It dates perhaps as early as 125 CE, which means that it was maybe created a mere 30 years after the original. It's pretty small though, containing only a few lines from John chapter 18.
I wish I knew what those lines were. Well, I'm sure we could look it up. What does P52 say in English? So this is what we think. This is what we have. And it contains John 18:34 through 36. The Jews, for us, it is not permitted to kill anyone, so that the signify die and Jews. So frustrating, but so interesting, right? That you only get this, but because you have all the other copies and the tradition and everything, you fill it in. So what they found, the earliest New Testament text is from this verse. The Jews, for us, it is not permitted to kill anyone, so that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was going to die, entered therefore again into the praetorium, Pilate, and summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Thou art king of the Jews?" Interesting. The verso text comes from the Gospel of John. We have these parts at the end. For this I have been born, world so that I would test of the truth, said to him, and this, the Jews, not one fault. So it's this scene of Pilate questioning Jesus. So interesting. All good, infamous brother. All good. Yeah, if anyone, go ahead and answer that poll. Go ahead and join the Discord if you're so interested, so inclined. Drop any questions or comments into the chat. Right now, I'm just learning about what the oldest transcripts of the New Testament we have are, and we found a couple different. I mean, the one that is the most famous that we know, which is because it's a complete transcript, is the Septuagint. And that includes the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's basically the first full Bible that we have. The only thing is that it's in Greek, which is okay. I mean, this is in Greek too. So it's the Old Testament part, and even what the words of Jesus are not in the original Hebrew or Aramaic in the case of Jesus. But we can pretty much trust, I believe, that it is a authentic copy, an authentic transcript of the Bible. But this is the earliest little fragment that we have, and that's from 125. And remember, John is kind of assumed to be written originally in about 90 CE. So this is right after. This is about as close as it gets in terms of a copy in the ancient world, which is incredible. And we were just reading sort of what that actually says. And we might continue this video and see what the other... I'm guessing, the Dead Sea Scrolls, very famous. I just had the opportunity to go see some of them, some fragments. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So let's see.
On each side. It was found in Egypt in 1920 and is currently on display at the University of Manchester. Okay, this means that we're now finished with the New Testament. Therefore, the top 3 manuscripts are all going to be Hebrew documents that contain portions of the Old Testament, or Tanakh. Number 3 is the Nash Papyrus, found in 1902, once again in Egypt. Prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nash Papyrus was the oldest fragment we had of the Hebrew Bible, dating to around 150 BCE. However, the Nash Papyrus only contains a very small portion of the Torah, mostly just the 10 Commandments and the Shema prayer. It's now located at Cambridge University. Okay, we now come to...
I didn't even realize we had... I thought the Dead Sea Scrolls were from this 1 to 100 period, but I'm guessing there's going to be some that are before this even. That is old.
A biggie.
That is very old.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, famously discovered in 1946 at Qumran. Arguably one of the most important archaeological finds of all time. Loads of documents were found, ranging in dates from 300 BCE to 100 CE.
Incredible.
There were portions or fragments from every part of the Tanakh except for the book of Esther. Most notable was a mostly intact, near complete scroll of the book of Isaiah. But there were also several apocryphal books found, as well as documents relating to the Jewish community that lived at Qumran. So the main thing you need to know about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they're not some sort of alternative Bible. They are simply copies of the Bible that we already had, as well as some copies of some non-biblical writings. And the important thing is that they actually confirm that the copy of the Hebrew Bible we have today is pretty much the same as the copy of the Hebrew.
That's really important because remember, I mean, you don't remember if you weren't here, but when we were learning about the Masoretic text, this is the oldest complete copy of the Old Testament that we have in the original Hebrew. And that comes in, let's see, when he put 1,000 for Codex Leningradensis and 920 for Codex Aleva. So that's 1,000 years. And when they found 1,000 years of oral tradition, essentially, because we haven't found any other writing between this and here. So 1,000 years of plus of oral tradition, and it's confirmed. So they accurately pass down the oral tradition, the stories, the books of the Old Testament for over 1,000 years. This one is the great Isaiah scroll, and it's apparently, I mean, I don't read Hebrew. I'm not an ancient Hebrew scholar. Apparently shockingly accurate.
They are simply copies of the Bible that we already had. Is pretty much the same as the copy of the Hebrew Bible that was around during the time of Jesus. Remember how I mentioned earlier that prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest version of the Tanakh that we had in Hebrew was the Masoretic text, which dates much later to around 1000 CE. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text pretty much line up perfectly, meaning that although 1,000 years passed between them, the scribes actually did a very good job at copying things accurately. Sure, there are some minor differences, mostly variations in spelling, shown here in green, but there are no examples where an entire story was changed in some dramatic way. This screenshot here is actually from a great website called dssenglishbible.com. I'll link to that in the description. It shows you exactly what the differences are between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text, the red words being the ones that are slightly different. Okay, so what could be older than the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, coming in at number 1, representing the oldest text of the Bible ever found, is the Ketef Hinnom Scrolls. Notice that I had to extend the timescale so that I could fit their estimated date of 650 BCE.
This was just discovered in 1979, it seems like. 650 BC. That is ancient. That is an ancient text.
On there. Now, these are not actually manuscripts per se. They are tiny amulets of rolled silver, but on them are inscribed letters written in a very old Hebrew script that match the text of Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. This passage is known as the priestly blessing, and it is still used in Jewish synagogues today, which is cool because we know that these words are at least 2,650 years old, being the only words from the entire Bible that can be archaeologically placed prior to the destruction of the first temple. And here's another cool fact about the priestly blessing. When a member of the Kohanim, who are thought to be the descendants of the original Jewish priests, says this blessing, they hold their hands like this. A certain Jew by the name of Leonard Nimoy remembered seeing this as a kid.
Wow.
And it served as the inspiration for what has become known as the Vulcan salute.
That is
So
so interesting.
basically, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls are a 2,600-year-old version of Live Long and Prosper. Okay, now that I have introduced
Fair
you
enough.
to some of the oldest Bible manuscripts, I'd
650.
like to end by discussing what it all means when it comes to the historical method.
Wait, let's see what number 624. Let's read it in our own words. How about that? 624. Oh, it's 6. It's a blessing. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance unto thee and give thee peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. That's so funny. I read that this morning. I'm reading the Bible cover to cover. And this, I remember, wait, this looks familiar. This is literally the part that I'm at. Yeah. And I read this chapter, and I stopped halfway through 8. What a funny coincidence. I love those little serendipities. I don't believe in coincidences. Serendipities.
Method. Supposedly, the famous Christian evangelist Billy Graham once said that there is more evidence that Jesus rose from the dead than there is that Julius Caesar ever lived. This is an idea that continues to be floated by some Christians today. And in fact, it even comes up in the comments on this channel every now and then. The argument usually involves a chart that looks something like this. We see listed here several works of ancient literature, including that of the New Testament. It then lists 2 key pieces of information. The first is the amount of time between when the work was written and the earliest manuscript we have of that work. So, for example, the chart tells us that the gap for Tacitus is 750 years, but the gap for the New Testament is only 30 years. Secondly, the chart lists the total number of manuscripts we have for each piece of writing. So again, according to this chart, we have only 36 manuscripts for Tacitus, but we have a whopping 5,856 for the New
Jeez,
Testament.
is that true?
Now, there are 3 major
What the-
problems with this chart.
Yeah.
The first is that it is extremely misleading.
Yeah.
At first glance, one might assume that we have close to 6,000 complete manuscripts of the New Testament, all of which date close to 30 years after they were written.
Yeah, that
If
can't
this
be
were
the
true,
case.
it would indeed be pretty impressive, but it's not. Let me show you a different chart. So far, the number of manuscripts we have from the 1st century, which is when Jesus lived and when most of the New Testament was written, is 0. And from the 2nd century,
Oh, okay. The manuscripts that we have. Right. Because the first one we have, what we already said, the earliest is 125. So there you go.
we have a grand total of 4. And all of those are extremely small fragments. I mentioned 3 of them in this video, the oldest being the Rylands Papyrus. Now, it is in fact true that the Rylands Papyrus might date to a mere 30 years after the original. But keep in mind that the Rylands Papyrus is by no means a complete copy of the New Testament. It's just a tiny piece of paper with a few lines on it, as are all the other 2nd century manuscripts. When we get to the 3rd century, the number of manuscripts goes up to around 50. And here we get for the first time a few that contain complete books, such as the Pauline epistles from the Chester Beatty collection and the Gospels of Luke and John from the Bodmer collection. However, the vast majority of those 50 are still very small fragments. Moving on to the 4th and 5th centuries, the number of manuscripts goes up to around 100. And it is here that we get the 4 great uncials, the only 4 complete New Testaments in Greek that have survived from ancient times. Everything else is just fragments or partial manuscripts. We then get another 350 or so from 500 to 1000 CE, meaning that the vast majority of that 5,856 number comes from after the year 1000. So this certainly paints a bit of a different picture.
Yeah.
But my second point is that from the
But
perspective...
let's still. So the real gap we're talking about to get up to 50 is more like 150 years. And that sort of adds up with the other ones that make. So, I mean, this is strange that 750 years Tacitus' Annals and there's 36, but so we're really talking about like this level. And even for these, which is interesting, there are many more manuscripts. And I don't even, because this part of the graph is so untrustworthy, you don't know what the hell any of this means, really. But, oh, American, welcome, brother. Feel free to join that Discord if you'd like. You say, yes, God does exist, but not the Christian God, and not in the way that I believe. Well, I'm interested, brother. Spell it out for me. Which God do you believe in? Or if not one that's created already, how do you conceive of God? What does that mean? What does that word mean to you? Out of curiosity. That'd be interesting. And yeah, again, of course, feel free to hop in the Discord, but I know sometimes you're either at work or I can't remember what you're up to, but sometimes you can't. So that is okay. But let me know. If there is a God, he is not involved in our lives, and we cannot comprehend it. Do you mean fully comprehend or get even a little bit of it? Because you already seem to comprehend a little bit of it if you think that he's not involved in our lives, or can't be, especially if you're going to say that. And why wouldn't he be involved if he's... So is he infinite, or is he sort of like I don't know, like some kind of alien that created a Sims computer program and we're in that program? Or why would he not be involved? Is that the problem of evil, perhaps? Yeah, we cannot comprehend it fully. I mean, I agree. I'll agree with you. In my conception of God, we can't comprehend him fully. But I definitely think we can get as much information as we can get. But it seems like even you agree with that because you have some information about him, i.e. the fact that we can't comprehend him fully or that he's not involved in our lives. So why do you say he's not involved in our lives? What makes you think that, per se? Very curious about that whenever you have a chance. Because if he's not involved in our lives and we can't comprehend him fully, why would you presume him to exist? It's an interesting take. This is sort of like deism. I feel you're like a deist, which is okay, which is cool. But I'm definitely curious about how that works out. And why?
Which were not actually written by Jesus himself. Sure, they most likely do contain some of the actual words of Jesus, but remember, these would have been translated from the original Aramaic to Greek. And each gospel as a whole was written by an author who was likely writing 40 to 70 years after Jesus' death, and who was trying to make certain theological points, rather than simply record a series of events. So if I had to place a wager on who was more likely to have been a real historical person, I'd place my bet on Caesar. Of course, such a forced choice is not actually necessarily. I firmly believe, as do most historians, that both Caesar and Jesus were real historical people. Now, as to whether or not the Gospel's portrayal of Jesus is 100% accurate, well,
You consider yourself a deist at the moment, but my mind is open and willing to change my mind if proven otherwise. I like that. That's good. It's good to have an open mind and an open heart and be willing to change. For me and for anybody. But I'm curious about how you come to deism. Most people, I'd have to actually talk to you to do my expectations justice. Yeah, that's definitely true. Which again, of course, that Discord link is there, and I'll post it again. But I understand if you can't right now. I'm just curious about how you get to deism, because that's actually one that I never really. Well, maybe I did for a little bit when I was like kind of new age. It's kind of the same as like Taoism in a weird way, or not the same, but Taoism is sort of a form of deism, where it's like there's this God, there's this like universal energy, but it's impersonal. It's sort of kind of like nature itself. It doesn't have a personhood. It's not interested in individuals. It just kind of is the flow of life. Is that the kind of deism you practice? Or do you, or not practice, but believe? Or do you have this sense that like the problem of evil prevents there from being a personal God who like loves us and cares about us and created us for a purpose and things like that? Those are usually the two camps people sort of like fall into. I'm curious which one you fall into and why, if possible. It's very interesting. Maybe we can I don't want to just click on any random video because it probably won't do it justice, but maybe if there's someone we trust explaining it. I do trust this guy, but that's a long video. Oh yeah, and this is a good question too. So this is a video about a guy who came from deism. He came to deism from atheism. So I'm curious if you came to deism from atheism or if you came to deism from religion, because those would be two different pathways in. I think there it is. I think that if there is a God, all evidence points to him not being involved in our lives or even creation. So if I want to believe in a good or in a God, he can't be personal due to all the problems like you stated. Yeah, right. If you want to believe in a God, he can't be personal due to all the problems that I stated. Okay, I understand. So I'm still curious about what some of that evidence is. Like, I guess it is the problems that I stated, like the problem of evil, but Christians have an answer, a theodicy for the. Actually, a lot of different religions have a theodicy for the problem of evil. So I guess it does come down to not being convinced that those work. So for instance, the classical like Christian answer to the problem of evil is that out of any evil, an infinitely good God could create a greater good, which is sort of the story we get. So out of the evil of Adam betraying God and introducing sin into the world and the devil doing the same thing, God gives us this beautiful story, this beautiful person of his son who saves everybody and creates this heaven for us all to live in. That would be one theodicy. Other people have different theodicies, and other religions have different theodicies. So those are just not. Yeah. Okay, I feel you, American. We don't have to get into it per se. Maybe we'll watch a little bit. In the meantime, about. Let's see what this guy has to say.
Leaving religion, believing that, the Bible was written by God himself. Sorry. To me, it's a beautiful book. Priceless life lessons inside of it. Some really cool stuff. But it was written by mortals. It was written by human beings.
I don't think anybody denies that within Christianity, that the Bible is written by humans. We say it's the inspired word of God, as in God spoke through people in their hearts primarily, I think. So, yeah, I mean, if you believe it's written by humans, that doesn't preclude you from being following it religiously.
And translated poorly and rewritten and rearranged. And if you really study the history of the Bible, you'll realize it's a hodgepodge of old stories told by human beings. Flawed, imperfect human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe it happened? Maybe, like the whole story of Christ and everything else. It probably happened. I mean, I don't know. There's some evidence that the story was lifted. But I choose to believe it probably happened. Just a regular guy who probably had some revolutionary ways of thinking. And the old guard didn't like that and killed him. Sure. Happens all the time throughout history. But
Sort of a watering down. I mean, there's a difference between Jesus and like Gandhi or Jesus and other revolutionaries, i.e. the resurrection, i.e. the new religion that comes about. And I know there's others that do that. Buddha, or what was his name again? Gautama. So I understand that has happened before, but I think there's a pretty significant difference between Jesus and just any other revolutionary. For one, the miracles and the resurrection, which I think can be defended on a couple different accounts. But, well, if he doesn't want to get into his argument for why it's just a hodgepodge of things, I don't necessarily have to get into my argument for why it's not, but fair enough.
You know, the whole heaven and hell, and this is what's going to happen when you die. You know, how can anybody really predict that? I've got my own ideas, and so does everyone.
Well, if Jesus is God, which would be proven by the resurrection, or at least is extremely divine, has a high level of divinity, then he could predict that. So it would mean is, for example, the moral inconsistency between the New Testament and the Old Testament, which seems more human than the divine. The problem of evil, which does not make sense with an all-loving, all-powerful God. Okay, so you don't accept the theodicies, and you believe there's a moral inconsistency between the New Testament and the Old Testament. So what is the moral inconsistency on? Is that on God's part or on people's part? Because I can bring you to a scripture. Which scripture does... Mark 10:5. So remember, if you want to accept the proof of evolution and how it points to more of a natural origin than a divine origin, actually, I don't think evolution does point to any natural origin. I know it's called, Darwin's work is called The Origin of Species, but it doesn't give any origin. It just gives a mechanism by which species evolve, which I agree with as a Christian. I think you can very easily accept evolution in a Christian framework, especially because evolution says nothing about how inert matter becomes organic, becomes living. They have no idea how that could happen still. It's a great mystery. They try to recreate it in labs, and they can't. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not doing a God of the Gaps thing. I'm not saying there's no possible way to square those things, but I can listen. Not no idea. Okay, yeah, you're right. They do have hypotheses. They do have sort of, again, but there's no proof. There's no, in the same way that, like, to the point of the origin of life, that's one thing, but how about the origin of the universe? How about the origin of everything? How about why there's something rather than nothing, the most fundamental origin? So, yeah, we'll see what Infamous has to say about that. But again, you don't have to disbelieve evolution and to be a Christian or to throw the Bible. They throw monomers in hot springs and make RNA from what I've heard, but I could be wrong either way. Yeah, exactly. So either way, it doesn't really matter. My understanding is they have been working on this problem hard in labs for years. And I definitely listened to a podcast about this before I was a Christian where I was like, oh, we'll figure it out for sure. Now I'm not so sure if we will figure it out, but maybe we will. And even if we did, it still wouldn't disprove, or it still wouldn't say anything to the origin of all things. But where does a monomer come from? How did that start? Dave Farina. I'll look him up, and if it's something digestible, we can even watch it right now. Which I'll share my screen for that. YouTuber, cool. Dave Farina. Okay. Cool. And this is a Professor Dave video, but it's 2 hours long. Okay, Professor Dave. Oh, that's what everyone's been telling me to watch as well, so that's cool. So let's see what he thinks. This is a 5-minute video. That's sick.
Hey, it's Professor Dave. Let's talk about the origin of life.
He knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
We know that all living organisms on Earth are made of cells, and that everything on Earth is related by some common ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
But where did the first cell form, and how did it happen? How do we even know that this is possible in the first place? As our understanding of chemistry and biochemistry became more and more sophisticated in the 20th century, we began to learn about the components of the cell, especially DNA, which we call the molecule of life, since it carries the genetic code for an organism.
Which I'm hoping he begins to explain how that. I mean, I'm sure the point of this video is to explain how the DNA began, how that could have possibly come together and been created. But something interesting about it is it's a code. It's like it's almost like a code that a human would make. It's a combination of letters. I mean, obviously it's not literally like, the letter A, T, C, and G, but that's the representation of it. That's the way we understand it as a code. And so have you ever seen a program that has no coder? A code that has no one that wrote the code? So we'll see. Just questions to think about. I'm not trying to debunk evolution. I believe in evolution, so I'm not debunking anything. It's a code in metaphor only. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, it is a metaphor, certainly. It's not literally those letters. I understand that. But let's see how Dave describes it.
Began to understand the processes it undergoes, like replication, so that every new cell can have a copy of all the DNA, as well as transcription and translation, which dictate exactly how DNA serves as a code for all the components that make a species unique. We began to wonder, how could these molecules have assembled by themselves billions of years ago? A crucial experiment was performed by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in the 1950s to shed some light on this mystery. They set up a system that was meant to mimic conditions early in Earth's history, just after it cooled down enough for liquid water to exist. In this apparatus, they placed water, ammonia, methane, and hydrogen, all of which was exposed to heat as well as an electric current meant to simulate lightning. After about a week, they found that the reaction mixture contained a number of different amino acids, which, as we remember from biochemistry, are the building blocks of proteins. Since proteins include enzymes, which catalyze the formation of nucleic acids like RNA and DNA, this offered good evidence that it is indeed possible that the basic materials needed for life could have been generated spontaneously. Furthermore, this experiment was only a week long, So 500 million years of molecules sloshing around in the primordial soup could conceivably produce much more impressive results. These findings prompted further speculation as to the specifics of how the first primitive cell could have formed.
I mean, so far I don't disagree with any of this. I mean, obviously I don't. It's science. I mean, not that you can't disagree with science, like it's some kind of, dogma or something. But no, I mean, I don't disagree with any of this. I don't see how this contradicts anything about the Bible or anything about creation. Because you still have to answer the question of why this would be the case. First of all, where does anything come from? That's the more fundamental question. Where does matter itself? And that goes back to fine-tuning and whatever. It doesn't matter. We don't have to start there. But why would it be the case that an electric... I mean, I'm sure this is ultra simplified. I'm not trying to be, needlessly harsh. But why would it be the case that water and heat and lightning would create amino acids? That doesn't seem natural. That seems... Yeah, right. Okay, wait, so you have some comments here. So I think his debunks of James Torr is the best explanations of origin of life, argumentation with regards to creationism. Yeah, we'll watch his creationism video. Oh, here, if you're trying to join and it's not working, you have to accept the rules, American, in the rules tab of the Discord. But if you don't see the link, then I'll give you the link. Right here. Okay, so, we'll watch his creationism debunking, because I'm curious about that. And if he's just debunking flat earthers and young earth creationists, then that'll be easy to agree with him about. Like how laws of physics, it's a code and metaphor only, like how laws of physics are described as laws. But laws of physics are laws, like in the sense that they restrict behavior. And so... yes, I understand it is a metaphor, but it also tracks to something real. In the same way that the DNA code is a metaphor, but it tracks to something real. So it's impressive this is done in the 30s. That is very impressive. This is more about how life could have come about. It doesn't really contradict the Bible if you view the making of humans from clay as a metaphor. Exactly, which I do. Hello, American. Welcome to the Discord. Welcome to the Discord. So these simulate early Earth environment, so it's likely. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand the experiment is powerful. It's strong. It just doesn't contradict. It doesn't say anything that contradicts the Bible. This would just be the process by which God created things, right? Because it seems inordinately unlikely that if you just left it up to random chance, which I guess you're saying if there's a 500 million years, then any randomness can happen, but that actually isn't that long of a time. But also these things already have to have the nature and the attributes of being able to do this at all, which adds up to all other sorts of random chance. And then they have to be able to they also have to, as far as I understand this, the small organic molecules have to have the nature of becoming monomeric biomolecules, which have to have the nature of becoming macromolecules, which also then have to have the nature of becoming a complete living cell. And so each one of these steps requires like some sort of baked in, like inherent order that you wouldn't expect in a chaotic universe. Yeah, you're right. Origin of the universe is a different argument. I just don't see, if the universe is purely chaotic, there's not an ordering force, i.e. God, but you can talk about anything. You don't know what a chaotic universe looks like, so how can you... Exactly, so it's strange when people claim that the universe is chaotic. Like, even in this video, he said, well, randomness, but, by random chance, this could happen. Well, all of this is already so ordered. So where's the random? Where's the chaos? I agree. We don't live in a chaotic universe, but that's typically the claim.
Like amino acids and nucleotides came about spontaneously, how did they then...
welcome, America. I'm guessing you're still in class, but if you want to talk, just raise your hand and I'll let you in. If chaotic things happen, then we label everything, then it appears to be ordered. If chaotic things happen, then we label everything, then it appears to be ordered. I'm not sure exactly what that means, Infamous. Oh, what's up, American? Welcome, brother. Welcome.
Do I sound okay?
Yeah, sound good. Sound good. I'm gonna turn you up a little bit on my end,
My
but
car right now.
oh, you're in your car. Cool. So this
Yeah, well,
this stuff kind of convinced you, but do you see my point of view here, where I don't have to deny, and most Christians don't deny like science in order to believe in the Bible, because they're two different genres. They're two different things entirely.
yeah, I don't think you need to deny science to be a Christian. And the reason why I say this is because before I was a theist, I was a theistic evolutionist as a
Right.
Christian. And that's why I pointed you to IP, because he kind of explains all that pretty well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you did tell me about IP. That's right. Yeah, he's awesome.
But I also feel like it's a steady slope that, like, once you go into theistic evolutionism, and then it's just kind of like over time you'll kind of get to where I'm at. Where like
Mm-hmm.
the more you see it, it's like you start seeing how God is kind of taken out of everything, where He doesn't really.
But where is
Like-
God? In what way is God taken out of this equation? Because, so
Oh.
to me, it's like the more you learn about how intricate and ordered and complex and cool, essentially, the things of science are, the more impressed I am by the mind of God to be able to create this. Because again, it goes back to the question of why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, I think it really like you said originally, you don't believe in a chaotic universe. I do believe in a chaotic universe. I do believe random events happen,
Mm-hmm.
and as he naturally try to give it or label it in
Yeah.
some kind of order. And I think, as the history of the Earth will tell you, it's pretty random.
It's pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so the history of the Earth in terms of like, geology and biology and chemistry and all that stuff.
Meteors, asteroids,
Yeah.
the formation of planets.
The formation of and continents and all the dinosaurs running around eating each other's heads off and stuff like that, right? But do you see like how at the very building blocks of it, it's so ordered? So on a couple different levels, like there's one level to observe this as like chaos, obviously, like that would sort of be like the middle level, which is funnily that's how the Bible describes us, in the very middle of creation, between the highest things and the lowest things. But on like the minute level of say chemistry or biology, which we were just learning about, it's hyper ordered, like it's extremely you need all these things to be exactly the way they are. They have the very exact nature that they have in order to create the higher level thing. Like I was talking about with the biomolecule. Wait, let's go back. Small organic molecules have to be in exactly a type of way to be able to create monomeric biomolecules, which have to be in an exact type of way to be able to create biomacromolecules, which have to be in an exact type of way to create a complete living cell. And so that would be the most minute level. And then on the highest level, so we were talking about like asteroids and, like meteors and planets colliding to create the Earth. On the middle level, that looks chaotic because we just see an asteroid coming and destroying a bunch of stuff, which is chaos. That is definitely chaos. But on the highest level, if you really look out on the stars, like in the galaxy and the stars, there's this incredible orbiting. There's this incredible order, and like all the planets perfectly circling this beautiful sun, which is perfectly circling this black hole, which, I mean, obviously perfect is a bit of a subjective term. But there's a cool GIF of the way the planets orbit the sun, which orbits the Milky Way black hole.
Well, you're saying the order that molecules need to take in order to create more advanced life, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that just comes with time. like that didn't just happen. It took billions of years, and then
Totally.
of course, eventually, you give something enough time, it's going to happen. Even if you're in a chaotic universe, you give something enough time. Like, what's the saying? If you give like chimps, like an infinite amount of chimps or something, enough time, up Shakespeare. Like, if you give
Yeah.
anything enough time,
If
it happens.
I agree,
So-
if we're talking about infinity, that would be true. That would most likely be true. But we're not talking about infinity. We're talking about a very finite amount of time on all these levels.
So we're talking about.
We're talking about a long time, but actually in a long time,
very simple cell organism.
yeah, in a long time in a chaotic universe, I would expect it, my intuition, but we could look at like chaos theory or whatever. We could try to figure this out. I would expect things to get more and more chaotic, not more and more ordered over time. That wouldn't make sense to me.
Well, I don't know. I would argue. I would expect that you have like the Big Bang and everything's crazy, but then everything starts to, like anything, like drastic happens, but then
It
as
starts
time
moving
goes by, it
towards
starts
more
to
and more
decline.
order, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean the natural laws, gravity, all that stuff. And I mean, if I was a Christian, like I go back and forth, like not between Christianity and that, but like I said, I have my mind open, so I play both sides.
Right,
And,
right.
And I would say like the natural laws,
Yeah.
how like in nature there's just these laws that exist.
Mm-hmm.
Where did those come from? How did that happen? That's a pretty good question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it goes to the question of how does that because if those are the most fundamental things, and I would say even more fundamental than those are the laws of logic, like the law of identity and excluded middle, and the other one which non-contradiction. Those have to be true before there's even laws of nature, because things can't both be themselves and not be themselves, right? So there's certain things which we call transcendentals, which I think are best explained by nesting in the mind of a divine infinite being. But then I think Infamous is fairly rationally going to say they could just exist as brute facts by themselves, and then you would have to say that the laws of nature also just exist as brute facts by themselves. Or maybe you could go to some kind of multiverse theory, which has its own problems, but fair enough. You could try to do that.
To be honest, my argument against Christianity, or why I don't really believe it, isn't because of science. So I never believe
right.
Those are separate. Mine is more like, how can all-loving God allow?
So that makes sense. That is the problem of evil, truly. Yeah.
Theistic. Like I said, I would consider myself more of a theist right now, so I don't deny that there may be a God, right? But I believe there is a God. There's no way in hell either he's all-powerful or all-loving, or he might not even care. You know what I mean?
He might even be evil, according to your view, because if there's so much evil going on, and he knows about it, or can even have any conception of it, then he would be evil not to stop it, right?
I wouldn't expect him to be all evil, because it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't expect him to be all evil either. So the question is, this is what C.S. Lewis is going to bring up. Well, quickly I'll respond to Infamous. X chaotic thing happens and then Y and Z. If we label all those things in an order, then it appears ordered. That's because chemistry gets more complex naturally due to the principles of systems chemistry, which is essentially chemical evolution. And this is just a long version of look at the trees. Yes, it is sort of a long version. It's sort of a scaled out version of look at the trees, which I think is a good argument, honestly. Look at them. But anyway, so like look at the black holes. If I could, I would love to. Like X chaotic thing happens and then Y and Z. If we label all those things in order, then it appears ordered. Yeah, I mean, I agree that we have to use language. So, but I don't think it's intuitive that chaos equals order, or that like order is indistinguishable from chaos except for how we label things. That doesn't seem intuitive to me, or really make sense. But anyway, so to your point,
humanity, I'm sorry. I think in humanity we naturally give order to the world, right? That's why we have civilization. That's
Right.
why we have anything,
Yeah.
right? We came from the natural world and
Yeah.
we set out to give it order. And
Yeah.
I think we do the same thing with the universe. But
Yeah.
you get rid of our society and then the laws of nature kick back in,
But they would
and,
still
like,
be the
animal-
laws of nature. There would still be the laws of logic. There would still be these ordering principles.
But not necessarily. What I'm saying is us humans give order to nature. So, right, we created laws, right? We said murder is
Uh-huh.
wrong. But in nature, that's not a law. Animals kill animals just to eat.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is if you remove what
But we didn't
put
create gravity equals
nature's-
9.8 meters per second squared or whatever it is. Like, we didn't create that.
Yeah. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we
Yeah.
look at the universe and we say, oh, there's some kind of order, which, don't get me wrong, there are laws. There are actual laws that we can prove that exist.
Mhm.
But saying, like, that we don't live in a chaotic universe, I think we do. I mean, when you look at, I keep saying asteroids, just like bumping into planets, just random stuff happens.
Yeah.
Chaotic stuff happens.
Well, chaos
That doesn't-
definitely exists in the universe. There is a chaotic factor to the universe, for sure. Totally agree with that. Just the question, I just think it can't possibly be totally chaotic or even mostly chaotic because that would look very, very different.
Yeah, I don't think we live in a chaotic universe. That wouldn't have any laws of nature or anything.
Yeah, there would be no laws, there would be no reason or ration or, nothing would be held together in any way. If you imagine like the most chaotic universe you can imagine, basically. If there's any chaos, then it's all chaos. If you have any randomness in a system, then it's all randomness. I think that's probably some kind of philosophical point that we could get into, but does that seem intuitive to you at all, American?
If it's some chaos, that means it's all chaos. I would have a hard time arguing that because how does that correlate or like go with the rule, like gravity, right? We can predict orbits because there is some kind of order
Right.
that we can predict.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
it was all chaos, we would never be able to predict orbits of asteroids. So it isn't all chaos. I think there is chaos. Random things do happen, but is it everything? Definitely not. The fact
Yeah.
that we can do math and physics proves that there is some kind of predictable order.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I agree that there's predictable order, and actually to Infamous's points, I see where he's gonna go and where he's coming from. Where if there's any chaos, then it's all chaos because it's sort of like it throws off the whole system. But that's why I technically don't believe in any chaos. I just believe that we perceive things as chaotic, which we don't understand. We perceive things as random, which we don't understand. But I don't want to make that point here with you, American, because we're not at that level right now.
Can I ask you, do you
Yeah.
believe that you can have some rules of nature or physics and still have random things happen in it? Like, just because of the laws of physics, there's an asteroid that does this orbit, but that asteroid just runs into this thing. Is that chaotic with rules attached to it, or does that mean it just happened?
Yeah, I don't
Because
think.
of-
Yeah, that doesn't seem particularly chaotic. Like the asteroid running into a planet, or running into like even say like a space freighter filled with human lives or something. Like, is that chaotic? Is that random? No, I mean
Yeah.
that's an ordered event. The asteroid is behaving according to laws. Humans are behaving according to laws. Something I believe in, which Infamous does not, is free will. So that introduces sort of a third variable. But
Well,
yeah.
how would if you're coming from a perspective of no God, then wouldn't everybody be able to do whatever the hell they wanted? There is nothing
If you're
deciding destiny.
if you're coming from a perspective of no God, then sorry, you kind of cut out. What was the question?
I'm sorry. If you believe, what is his viewpoint? Is he a Christian or?
Oh, Infamous is well, it's actually kind of unclear, but he's basically a agnostic atheist. Yeah, or atheist.
Okay, so if he's an atheist, I'm just look. I'm not qualified, like we know chaos thing, but but what I'm saying is, how do you not believe that you can do whatever the hell you want? And I guess that means, well, if there is no God deciding your destiny.
Yeah,
Because I feel like if you're arguing that there's a God, then I can make the argument that there might not be free will because he decides destiny. But if there is
Right.
no God, that means you can do whatever the hell you want. So I would think the
Yeah.
opposite.
I agree. If I were an atheist, I would agree with your intuition there and your experience of that free will, and that it is harder to argue for free will from a theistic perspective, but I can still do it. In fact, I need to do it. And in fact, it's revealed to
Yeah.
us that we do it. But so yeah, I'm gonna steal man Infamous's argument because we talked about it a lot, and I'm curious, Infamous, you call me out if you think that I'm going astray here. But his argument is all things happen according to cause and effect. So, for instance, your free will decision, say to choose a red shirt or a blue shirt, your intuition is that you make that decision freely, right? Like you just choose. Yeah. Okay, so Infamous is going to say, no, you don't just choose. Your brain activates a neural pathway to make the decision prior to, you having any choice about that. Those neural pathways are programmed and designed and or basically not designed, but he's not going to say designed, are caused, and those quote unquote decisions are caused by all these others, either subconscious or conscious or life history things that have happened to you that you had no choice over, no free will to choose. And because this like endless chain of cause and effect doesn't take into account your personal decision or something like that. In fact, your personal decision doesn't exist because you didn't choose to like red more than green or something like that. Then there are no choices. Every choice is predetermined.
So
Okay.
he believes it's like algorithmic kind of sheet.
He believes there's only two types of things: randomness or cause and effect. And if there's any randomness, which he somehow equates randomness with free will. I'm not really sure how or why that is a necessary move. Like, why can't free will be a third variable? But so the decisions are predetermined by the situations that are outside of mine or anyone else's control. Therefore, my choices are not in my control. Determinism, no. I think that was when I said that he only believes in randomness or cause and effect. But yeah, I guess his position is the decisions are predetermined by the situations that are outside of mine or anyone else's control. Therefore, my choices are also like those sort of predetermined situations, and they're not in my control. And that is determinism. I think you have to believe that as if you don't believe in like magic a little bit, if you don't believe in some sort of like special third thing. Or you don't. I mean, there is compatibilism as well, which says like, okay, so the choice to choose a red shirt over a blue shirt did flow through a series of cause and effect, and at some point in that series of cause and effect, it was out of your like sphere of self, like it was out of your control. But then that decision still flowed through you, like you still made the decision, and maybe you made it because of what you like and what you want, and that's what we commonly understand as free will. So
it's the argument that the environment makes the decision for us subconsciously for us.
Mhm.
So because of the environment, we have to choose that. Right?
Yeah.
We're not really choosing it, but because the environment makes us choose that. I mean,
right. He also doesn't believe
guess
in alternate reality. Like he doesn't believe in possible worlds, which is a philosophical concept of, well, I could have gone left or I could have gone right. He believes if you went left, there was no possible world in which you went right. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think a lot of that is debated in philosophy, but it's not like everyone agrees that there are no possible worlds. Most people believe in possible worlds, but yeah. So, and he goes, "Show me the possible world," but he kind of acts like Brandon when he says that, because of course I can't show it to you. It's a philosophical concept. Like I don't know how to show you that, but.
I mean, from that logic, I guess, you wouldn't be able to believe in a multiverse, but I definitely do believe in a multiverse. I think that I personally do believe in a free will, because I don't think that there's something determining our decision, therefore we make our own decision.
Right.
And I think that there probably is some kind of multiverse because of all the different decisions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. I used to believe in like a block universe type thing where every single decision was made and like stored in some kind of like matrix of multiple realities, you know what I mean? So like there's a real reality where I go left and a real reality where I go right, and because I'm consciously experiencing going left, um then that's just the one I place myself in, but the other one's just as real. That's what I used to believe. Now I think that
Yeah.
realities are definitely limited. Like there's just things you couldn't do.
I had to ask, as a
Yeah.
Christian,
Yeah.
are you allowed to believe in the multiverse? Because I would think not.
No, I think you are.
Really?
I don't personally because I think it has problem because the only reason the multiverse, as far as I can tell, is invoked is not because of any evidence or any scientific like studies or reasons per se, but it explains fine tuning in a non-theistic way. Although it really doesn't, because then you still have to ask the question of why is the multiverse there instead of not there? Why is there something instead of nothing? But yeah, so you do, as a Christian, you have to believe in the beginning. So in the beginning, God created X, Y, and Z. Sean has an interesting point. Wait, so, but I think you could believe, if you believe that the multiverse is not infinite, you could maybe believe that it had a beginning, and that God was doing that. Or you could believe that it all started at once in this like multi-reality type thing. But it doesn't really make as much sense. I think it makes more sense, like the Occam's razor thing, is that there's pretty much just this universe, but from a Christian perspective, not from the atheist perspective. But
I feel like as a Christian, you have to believe in only one universe because God created the universe and then created humans. I don't know how that would correlate with there being like a bunch of other universes that God created. Like, why would?
well, because then the universe would just mean the multiverse. So if God,
Okay.
but you're right. I mean, if you were, but again, I don't read the creation story scientifically. I don't think you can or should do that. But yeah,
No.
you're right. The most simple, the straightforward, simple, readable thing is that there's just this one universe, and that's what I accept. That's what I believe. But I'm not. I don't think you're. I don't think it's totally ruled out. I'd be surprised if there was any like sort of Vatican, you know, statement that says you cannot believe in the multiverse. I can't say why they would do that or how or what they would base that on. Because as long as the multiverse had a beginning, and I guess as long as I don't know, as long as all the things happened in those multiverses that God ordains, then yeah, I don't think it's necessarily ruled out. Okay, so Sean says the mind is immaterial. Immaterial things cannot be moved, almost by definition, I think. Therefore, the mind cannot be influenced by outside forces. Although it does seem that our minds are influenced by outside forces, although not in a direct sense.
Our mind is immaterial. Is that what he said?
Yeah, and I do believe the mind is immaterial. So there's the brain, but then there's the mind, right? Like the mind is like your consciousness, and we don't. I think
Okay.
that my intuition is that that is immaterial. That is the Christian
See-
perspective, but
And that's why I can't be an atheist personally.
why you
I-
can't be.
I can't because I believe that there's more to consciousness than just neurons. I think that
Yeah,
there is some. I think that there has to be. There seems to me personally
Mhm.
to be more to consciousness and what a person is than
Yeah.
just the neurons in there. And so that I can't be an atheist because I would have to believe that if I was an atheist. So that's why I kind of lean more towards theism.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that was also what led me away from like atheism was I was convinced of the immateriality of the mind, that it's not just neurons and connections. Like that is obviously a part of it. Like that is sort of that might be the tool by which, or like the medium through which it proceeds or something like that. Like the flesh is like kind of like the medium that the soul and the mind kind of interact with, the most physical, densest part of us. But you know, I think there's even scientific studies that would say that there's something immaterial about consciousness itself. Yeah. So Sean.
I definitely like to,
Oh yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I definitely like to hear an argument of someone who truly believes that there is nothing but neurons that create
Yeah.
the
Maybe we
brain.
could actually find
But
that.
I would like to hear that argument because I can understand it, but also the fact that it's still such a mystery. But I also don't want to argue from that because you could use that for anything, and then that could go against my argument.
Right.
But I would definitely like to hear the atheist argument for why they believe that it's only
Yeah.
neurons. Right?
So I looked up, is consciousness produced by the brain, which I think would be the answer to that question. And I have a feeling a lot of these are going to be actually against that idea, but we can see. So, science for monks, Lamau. Let's see, how brain scientists think about consciousness. Let's see what this guy has to say.
Arnie, when we think about human consciousness, the specialness that we all feel about being human, in reality, it gets back to our brain. We have to talk about the brain. How could this 3-pound piece of matter, think and feel? It seems incomprehensible.
Robert, I guess that's the most pressing question that any of us can answer. And obviously, we don't know. Let me take a whole brain, just use it as a kind of, more as a thought weight than anything else. We do know that action is based on input and output. Action to be appropriate needs an evaluation, and the sensory input gives us the raw materials for that evaluation. And the output then presumably allows us to produce the activity on the environment which is most useful for the organism at that particular point in time. It's a bromide to say that the cerebral hemispheres developed to this extent in order to make cognitive activity, thoughtful, meaningful decisions possible.
So this brain, we're now looking at the top. Now, how would you put this, like if this were in my head, how would that look?
If this were in your head, your forehead would be here.
So I would be down.
You'd be this way.
Okay.
Forehead here, eyes and nose beneath. In back, this would be the back of your head, and of course your neck would be down here. Your spinal cord would be coming up out of the brain stem. So in its situation, this is what you'd have.
This could be me.
And this could be you. As a matter of fact, this brain is in remarkably good shape. Very little atrophy. It's just a beautiful specimen of this remarkable
Except
organ.
it doesn't have a body.
It lost it along the way, yeah. And you asked the basic question, how do we think, how do we feel?
Yes.
And we don't have the foggiest notion. I can tell you this as a beginning.
Yeah.
There are two basic kinds of information that come into the brain. One is the information about how much, what, where, when, the qualia, the components of the individual experience. The other part, the other informational component, is not the quantity and not the quality, but the intensity of the experience. There are actually two parallel systems. One, and I'm going to go to the half brain for this.
Okay, this is beyond me already, but basically the point is, we don't know. We don't know. So I think it's actually let me look up this. This is a great video that we can watch, and I'm curious what you guys will think about. Hoover and
Still hear me?
Yeah.
To the other points that they're arguing.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing from a stance of like I know more because I don't.
Right.
So I'm just giving my own two-piece.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I don't think anybody should. I don't. I hope they're not being. I don't think anyone's trying to be, dismissive or anything like that. Infamous has a very, I'd say, he has an interesting worldview. The unfortunate thing is that unfortunate from my perspective, is that it does away with free will and some other sort of like possible worlds. Those are the two things that I would say are probably problematic about having that worldview. I don't think it does away with morality. I think it does away with your objective basis for morality, but it's obvious that you're a moral person. So it doesn't do away with your morality. But yeah, I think it's hard for you to have an objective basis for morality that doesn't just boil down to the subjective experience of a bunch of people, or maybe all people, or a large group of people. But that's okay. I mean, a lot of people, you can still be extremely moral, which I think you are, and have that view, but the objective basis is gone.
Man, I'd argue that morality doesn't really exist.
You would argue morality does not exist.
Yeah, I'd make the argument that we create morality, and I think there's plenty of examples around that all over the world, and how we create through society our own moralities, and then we create gods that we put our moralities onto, and then we kind of follow that.
So there's nothing wrong with like slavery per se.
Depending on what society you live in.
Right. So you're totally cool. Yeah, like if you're a German in 1945 and you kind of don't like Jews anyway, then that's cool to go along with that. You shouldn't resist it. You shouldn't try to help your Jewish neighbor. You should never resist what society believes is moral.
I feel like that's kind of like a straw man almost, because
but that's not it's not strong. It's just the logical conclusion. I know that's not what you're going to do, but I'm trying to make the point. I'm trying to show you that you do have some sense of objective morality, because I don't think if you were in Germany, you would be okay with what was happening to the Jews. But the point you just made is that morality is defined by society. So if you live in a horrific society, then the legitimate morality is what the society decides on, right? Or am I missing your point?
Well, no, my point is, because we live in the West and we've been taught that that's wrong, of course I think that's wrong, and of course I'd never be for that. But if I lived in a country where it was always okay to kill, it was always okay to commit genocide, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Why would I?
No, you
wouldn't.
wouldn't.
Back in the day, they had slaves and everything, and they didn't think anything was wrong about it.
Right, but from my position, I can say they actually were wrong. But your position is that they actually weren't wrong. Because that's what they decided, they were right. They were okay. That was fine.
I would argue that from my morality stance from today, being a Western male in the United States, I think that's wrong. But that's just me and what I have been raised to believe. And why have we fought so many wars, not only for religion, but for our moral beliefs? What we think is right. That's what war was about. It's because we have different morals, which means that there is this standard single moral structure. We all have different morals that we created.
No, I agree. But my interpretation is that we all have a different view of morality. So people enact the moral code differently, and in my belief system, I mean, from my view, people enact it horrifically. Like they actually go against it. Rather than just create it as they go along, right? So there is something wrong, which is, say, murder, right? That is actually wrong. That is wrong no matter who you are, where you live, what time you live in. Slavery is just wrong, no matter who you are, what time you live in, where you live. And some people choose to ignore that it's wrong and do it anyway. And, of course, their societies usually collapse and become horrific and horrible. But from your perspective, it sounds like they are not wrong. So a society that chooses to murder babies or kill Jewish people or anything like that is not wrong if everyone agrees that it's okay. Is that what you're saying? What's up, Nubanon? Welcome, brother.
I wanted to say, you're right, that wasn't a straw man. That was my bad.
That's all right.
But in a sense, my belief is that we create our own moral structures, and the morality that we have came from thousands of years ago. Who knows how long? You know what I mean? Like, let's look at a different timeline, for example. Like, what if original inhabitants of the Earth, the morals were like, you see like multiverse stuff where like,
Yeah.
you ever watch Rick and Morty, for example, where they have like, right, the dog have like the purges, then that's their morality, right? And it's silly to compare it to that, but like, imagine like a different Earth where like killing is actually okay because it's the strongest that survive, like the Viltrumites, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think we created this moral fabric a long time ago, and now we always maintain. But I don't think that exists as like a law of nature.
Yeah, and that's just where we disagree. I think that's a dangerous position to be in, because then if our society decides to, say, start changing its mind on things like, I don't want to like put you in any sort of corner, but like gay rights or something like that, or human rights, any type of human right, then you have no basis to say that it's wrong for the society to do that. So I know this is a thought experiment, but if tomorrow we woke up and suddenly, I really hate doing this because I'm not actually like a super anti-Trump guy. I've got my problems with him. But if we woke up tomorrow and Donald Trump is like, slavery is back, and you know what? And 80% of the country woke up and they're like, you know what? Slavery's back, or whatever percentage you would put your number at where you like agree with society, then really slavery's back. And not only is it back, it's okay. It's right. It's like the right thing to do because society has decided slavery's back. Whereas if you believe in an objective moral structure that things are wrong no matter how many people believe them, or where you live, or what time period you live in, then you actually have a rational reason, which is like, whatever, redundant, to resist that type of thing. You have a real like feeling, which I think you actually have, that slavery is wrong. Not just because everybody agrees that it's wrong right now. Because if you woke up tomorrow and everyone agreed that it wasn't, then I think you would still want to resist it.
Yeah, but is that because that's how you were raised?
I think it definitely are morals. Like, yes, definitely the way that you're raised makes it more obvious to you that slavery is wrong. But that's the only extent I would put that to. I think that is barely even relevant, because like, yes, we have the benefit of being raised in a society where we know that slavery is wrong. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be wrong if I wasn't raised in that society, because I still think it would be.
And to be clear, because I'm trying to like sort of read, but I'm also driving. So
Don't read too much. If you're driving, just focus. Yeah, focus on.
Explain the points that you're saying, because I keep saying at American.
Oh yeah, so at America, at one point in history, everyone thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe. Did that make the Earth the center? Now we believe that it orbits the sun. Did the Earth change position? That's a good point. That's somewhat relevant. So yeah, just because everyone believes something, that definitely doesn't make it true. Like by definition, morals are a little bit different than that. Yeah, the morals are definitely different than scientific facts, right? So maybe I'll let you respond to that.
No, I mean, just read the next one.
Okay, yeah. So then Infamous says his moral view isn't incoherent. He would say it is wrong to him. To them, it wasn't, which we can probably all agree to, and that morality isn't as objective as a physical fact. I actually believe morality is as objective as a physical fact, but that is because I'm a Christian, not because I can prove that. What I can prove or demonstrate, is that it's very dangerous not to believe in any sort of objective morality, even if it's less objective than, like, I don't know, the speed of gravity or the position of the Earth relative to the sun.
So does Infamous agreeing with my point? Does he have the same point as me?
Yeah, Infamous has a very similar perspective to you, yeah. His is basically...
And, look, let me say this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
His is also essentially, as far as I can remember, and he'll be quick to correct me, I'm sure, but that things are wrong because we know, because society knows. Oh, no. His is based on what is good for society. And so it is objectively bad for society. Like, it's a bad chess move to be murdering people, to be enslaving people, to be super racist and stuff like that. Like, that leads to bad. His is utilitarian. So it leads to bad outcomes, which is why it's wrong.
Evolutionary morality. I've also heard.
Yeah, that's essentially what that is, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what that is.
Have you ever heard of evolution?
Well,
have you ever heard of evolutionary morality? We do what, if we help this one person,
then it will lead to. Wait, hold on. I want our Infamous is crying in the chat because he says he's not utilitarian. No. But what I described is utilitarian. So, in what way are you not utilitarian when it comes to morals, Infamous? Quickly. I didn't want to misassign your view. But what I described was utilitarian, and it looked like you had agreed with that. Okay, so evolutionary morality, would that essentially be that what is moral is what propagates the species?
So can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, well, now I can't.
Evolutionary, what I mean is, evolution. I'm sorry. It's, breaking up.
No, you're good. Quickly, I'll respond to Infamous, because I don't think we can completely understand the best outcome. We just make our best guess, but that doesn't make it not utilitarian. That just makes it a guess at utilitarianism, which I think is even more dangerous. And I agree with you that we can't completely understand the best outcome. So, yeah, I don't see how that makes you not utilitarian. It just means you recognize the reality, the problem of utilitarianism. Yeah.
So what I would say is an evolutionary morality is when we were evolving, we based morality on what was good, right? So if we help somebody out, that's good because that person could help us out, or a good outcome could come out of that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and I guess it's also close with the social morality. I would actually believe that we do what is good for society. So to help others and not murder each other, that's how you build a society that's good. So that's what we would believe in.
Right. And that's fine, but I'm not content with leaving it up to biology to decide what is moral. Because if you look at the animal kingdom and the human past, we've done animals do crazy things, and it is good for their propagation and the flourishing of their society. Society in the loosest sort of biological term. But I think there's a higher moral order, especially for conscious, rational beings. And I don't see how that can be derived from biology. I kind of see how it can be derived from society, like what you're saying, the good of society is why we make certain decisions. But that also has led to scapegoating. And also it doesn't explain why I personally see self-sacrifice as in ending your your ability to reproduce for someone else, especially one that isn't even your child, which is what we see sometimes, and what we really find. For instance, not a soldier just signing up for the war in general, but a soldier jumping on a grenade for his friends not to die, which we see a lot, actually, surprisingly a lot. So that doesn't explain to me by biology. That doesn't make sense biologically. It kind of could make sense societally. Yeah, because sacrifice is good for the society, not the self, meaning there's a social pressure, not a selection pressure. But then if you talk to one of those soldiers who would do that or did do that, or the friend they did it for, and then you said, well, you were just socially pressured to do that, I'm not sure that's how they would feel. I'm not sure if that's true, per se. It's convenient to say, it's a good philosophical argument. But there seems like there's something a lot more to that.
I don't know about that because you're saying social pressure. I mean, so obviously he did that for his friends, correct?
Yeah.
And so like in society, you like your friends, like like a social network, right? And so we want to protect our friends. So the fight or flight kind of instinct kicks in, and he goes to protect his friends. That's kind of a social pressure, don't you think?
No, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a social element to it, but that is like the highest. Like, what's the point of protecting your friends if the society dies to you? Like, what is the point of the social pressure if you don't even engage in the society anymore, or your offspring because you don't get to have any, or like et cetera, et cetera. Like, it doesn't seem like that could be programmed in per se by any sort of pressures, because you don't experience the society anymore. Like the when you die, the society dies to you, right? So what's the pressure? Like, where does the pressure come from? And would not do it for a stranger or enemy. But that's why I think the highest morality comes from Christ in the Bible, where you would do that for a stranger or an enemy. You turn the other cheek. And most people see that as a high morality. Even if they're not Christian, most people read that and go, wow, man, this guy was onto something extremely moral. But why? That would be amoral according to societal pressure and biological pressure.
We do look at like heroes that like give up their lives and stuff, or like like when a soldier dies, he died in the country. He doesn't know everybody in the country, but he did it.
Right.
Or
right.
Like something as silly as like have you ever watched Batman? What's the one with Bane in it?
Yeah, exactly. When he brings the nuke over, when he takes the nuke away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we see that as
the highest thing. And then, of course, they cop out and, like, Batman survives or whatever. But yes, we do. When we think Batman's going to die, that is the highest, like, the self-sacrifice for the society, for the good of the other, is seen as the highest thing. And I could see where you could derive that being socially, like, societally sort of programmed.
The reason I go to that is because when we see before, like, everything got globalized, we all know about each other. Like the Vikings back in the day, they did not have the moral structure, the Christian structure at all. Or there's plenty of different moral fabrics all over that did not match. And so that to me feels like there isn't like this moral structure that's basically like natural law. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like a natural structure failed over
But then if there truly weren't a natural, like, moral objective realm or structure or something like that, then why would more and more people adopt, like, is it your view that the world, at least the Western world, is morally progressing in any way? Like, do we live in a more moral time, like a better morally time now than the Vikings did in their little, like, huts and stuff?
Yes. 100%.
So why did the Vikings all convert to Christianity? If one moral structure was not better than the other, or not more moral than the other, why are all the Vikings now Christians, like their descendants, / atheists or whatever?
The Christian structure gave more comfort, right? Because instead of like a moral structure,
but why?
Like sacrifice and like people and doing all this, because it's more comfortable not to be sacrificed. It's more comfortable not to live in a society that constantly involving killing, right?
Right.
Because you want to survive.
Yeah.
I would say survival.
So I think that's an objective realm. I mean, to even say that one is better than the other, there has to be some sort of objective basis of comparison, I think. Infamous says they didn't what? Yeah, the Vikings, I mean, it wasn't as clear as, like, the Vikings converted, but, I mean, that region, people that were all Vikings before became Christians. I mean, I don't know what the problem is with that.
The Scandinavian flags, like Sweden, Norway, they're crossing. If you look at the flag, it's literally a cross. So is the.
And Infamous says Christianity spread through war, but that's not the main way it spread. It did spread through war to an extent, but most of it was what's it called? Evangelism. So, like in Ireland, especially, funnily enough. But anyway, yeah.
Infamous, the Ireland's always on here.
Are you saying, Infamous, that Ireland was forcefully, or Scandinavia was forcefully converted to Christianity? I thought the reason we venerate St. Patrick is because of his evangelism to Ireland. You were forced to believe through starvation. Okay, we could get into that.
Yeah.
I mean, you would know more than me, I guess,
Irish?
but why do we venerate St. Patrick then? I thought the whole thing was that he converted Ireland, and obviously he didn't cause you guys to be starving. And yeah, I will actually. That'll be interesting to get into. We'll do that. We'll cue that up. Oh, I did want to watch this, but it was kind of more in reference to our last stream. This one is more relevant. Mathematical challenges to Darwin's theory of evolution. Now, this is not going to be anti-evolution, just so you're clear, but it is going to point out that there isn't an inherent contradiction between evolution and creation.
I'll be right back.
With today, 3 guests. David Berlinski is a philosopher, mathematician, and author who has lived in Paris for a couple of decades now and is now the editor of Inference.
Yeah, I'll look that up, Infamous. I'll see exactly what kind of sources I can find, and we can queue up a video either for next time or this time. Yeah, but these guys are going to make a little bit of a stronger claim than I even just made, that they're not exclusive, but they're going to say it's mathematically, evolution doesn't even explain, like, the theory of evolution and the way we understand it doesn't explain how we get the vast sort of difference of species. There's not enough time to create the number of species that we have and what we've seen in evolutionary history. And you've heard of, like, the different extinctions that have happened, and then there's the Cambrian explosion, and then the Cambrian extinction and stuff like that. And they're going to make mathematical arguments as to why it can't be as simple as just this, like, tree that starts with one organism, which it could have started with one organism, but then by totally random and natural chance, like, spreads out into what we have today. There just isn't enough time to explain all that, apparently. I mean, I don't know if talking about that is real. Well, we'll see. We'll see what their argument is.
View of science. David Galarenter is a professor of computer science at Yale and the author of a number of books, including most recently The Tides of Mind, Uncovering the Spectrum of Consciousness. Stephen Meyer is a philosopher and author. He directs the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute, a think tank in Seattle. Here's what brings us together. In the Claremont Review of Books this past spring, David Galarenter published an essay titled Giving Up Darwin. Quote, Stephen Meyer's thoughtful and meticulous book, Darwin's Doubt, convinced me that Darwin has failed. The Deniable Darwin and Other Essays, a book by David Berlinski, is also, quote, essential. David Galarenter, David Berlinski, Stephen Meyer, welcome.
Well, before you, I know you have problems with the Discovery Institute. I don't even know what that is. So why don't you listen to but why don't you listen if it's creationist propaganda instead of saying it's untrustworthy when you haven't heard any argument? That's untrustworthy to me. When you say, I haven't heard a single argument, let's turn it off. That sounds like the propaganda. So, yeah. Okay, you've heard of Darwin's doubts, so Infamous, either present an argument for why Darwin's doubt is fundamentally untrustworthy, or point me in the direction of a video or something that explains why it's untrustworthy. Or, again, that's only one of the 3 people here. But, like, this guy, I could say he looks untrustworthy just because of the way he's sitting. I agree, I don't necessarily trust these people, but they're going to present an argument, and we have to evaluate it on the terms of itself, not based on sort of your propaganda that it just is inherently untrustworthy, because I don't trust that.
Right. Definitions.
Have you ever seen Professor
Darwin's book
Dave's
is-
like
Mm-hmm.
3-hour-long video of like debunking every single type of creationism?
No, but we'll look that up because Infamous just
is
mentioned
so
it as well.
good. That's like what originally pointed me to where I kind of am. And
Right.
it goes into great detail. It goes into theistic evolutionism, deistic evolutionism.
The
It goes into like
definitive
every
guide
single.
to debunking
I think
creationists. This is a
know it's
long
long.
video. Well, I guess we
Yeah,
get.
it goes. It should be divided into different kinds though, so you can like go to a specific one
Right.
that you want to.
Okay.
Are
So
your standard-
things I don't believe with.
There you
Gap
go.
creationism, young Earth creation, flat Earth. I already don't agree with those. Day age creationism, I don't believe in, unless that means that days are an age of time, which I guess I might believe in.
I guess we would go to 7, huh? Or maybe 6.
Yeah, we could go to intelligent design. I
way,
believe in, so we could go to that.
Is Infamous the Irish dude? that's
Yeah,
always on
yeah,
there?
yeah.
I think it's Irish. All right, that dude's smart as hell, bro. He knows what he's talking about. That's why I kept asking. I was like, dude, because I'm always listening to this dude. He's smart. I like him.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like Infamous. He's a smart guy. He thinks about things deeply, but
Where is he, man? He's always up here.
I don't know. Yeah, today he can't talk, unfortunately. But okay, Professor Dave is great at debunking the Discovery Institute. Yeah, I mean that's fine. Okay, so I guess this is. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Infamous.
Trying to
We're
find-
all dumb compared to Dave, man.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
what it is.
which quickly congealed into matter, a plasma of quarks and leptons, which over subsequent epochs formed baryons like protons and neutrons. From unthinkable, you may point out to them. Pivoting from incredulity regarding well-substantiated science, more intelligent creationists will bring up what is called the fine-tuning argument. It applies to the physical parameters of the universe as understood by science, so it does not support young Earth creationism, but could be seen as supporting deistic evolution, at least at face value. The universe has a number of physical constants, or quantitative values, pertaining to fundamental characteristics that one might propose could potentially have had totally different values. These would include the fundamental unit of electric charge found on the electron, the ratio of the mass of the proton to the mass of the electron, the magnitude of the strong nuclear force, the gravitational constant we refer to as big G, the cosmological constant that determines the rate of the universe's expansion, and several others. It is often said by creationists that if any of these parameters differed from their current values by even a few percent, that life would be impossible, and in some cases, star formation or even atom formation would be impossible. The question becomes, why do the parameters have values such that all of these things can arise, including life? Creationists will posit that it is because a creator ordained them to be so. There are some obvious objections that can be put forward immediately. First, we have no way of knowing that these constants can indeed possess any arbitrary value, or even any value other than they currently have. The values may be much more constrained than we can currently explain, or they may even have existed for some initial time period in some kind of superposition of multiple values.
But see how this is just as like this doesn't defeat the other position at all so far. I mean, I'm going to listen to the rest, but like this is just as well maybe it's this way as saying there's a God. So, and I don't think anybody comes to God based on the fine-tuning argument, but it is something to think about. So it's like so far at least there's been no debunking of the fine-tuning. It's just like, well, this is a way that I can try to guess and explain fine-tuning, that they're totally confined even though we have no reason to think that they're totally confined. And we haven't discovered it yet. Or maybe they exist in some sort of, hyper-spatial relationship. He's good dude. Like, he's also hyper-aggressive, though. Well, I don't know what that's talking about. So, anyway.
With a particular set of values subsequently coming to
Professor
dominate.
Dave is very aggressive.
Oh, Professor Dave is aggressive. Okay, even doesn't seem aggressive so far. He seems like a good teacher. Like, I agree with everything he said so far. I just want to point out that when he says, like, well, maybe it's not, that's just the same as saying, well, maybe it's God. He's just saying, well, maybe it's not, right? Like, he hasn't so far debunked this one, but we'll see if he does.
One reason or another. Beyond this, the narrowness of the range of values that permit life are often overblown by creationists. Many have tolerances of an order of magnitude or more, not the fraction of a percent that is typically proposed by those making this argument. It should also be stated that some other totally different set of parameters could have led to completely unimaginable structures which led to life in some totally different way. It just wouldn't have looked anything like us, as it would be made of some other particles that don't even exist in our universe. Furthermore, without a complete understanding understanding of quantum physics, it is impossible to know how many of these constants are truly independent. It could be that there is only one such constant that all the others depend upon in some
Which you would still have to explain, but fair enough.
way. One constant coincidentally allowing...
Which is actually what I believe in, personally. Funnily enough, this is very close to the graph that I drew the other day, but and I draw this graph a lot when it comes to the laws of logic and laws of nature and stuff like that. So far this is not a debunking in any way. Yeah, the fine-tuning argument relies on epistemic possibility, which Dave looks over. Yeah, it doesn't really address the philosophical side of it. The reason it debunks it is because it can be some other thing that is not specified to prove your conclusion. Yeah. So I agree that it does debunk when someone says the fine-tuning argument proves that God exists. As far as I'm aware, there's no real proof that God exists. So if you say, well, these constants are the way they are, therefore you are wrong if you hold any other belief about how they could be. That's not what I would ever claim. I don't think you can claim that. What we do is we take a bunch of different evidences, we take a bunch of different food for thought, and we make an inference. We make the best inference we can to the evidence. And so that's what we do when we use the fine-tuning, if we're being nuanced. If he's responding to people that are saying fine-tuning equals God, I agree with him that doesn't follow. So I'll agree with you, Infamous, in that regard. We'll see what Real Human Being says. I think the real only proof for God would be personal experience, which is how I came to him and how pretty much every single person I know came to him. The personal relationship. But
why would God only come to certain people with personal experiences but not others?
No, I think he'll come to everybody.
And then why would he give you a eternal punishment for a finite crime of not forcing yourself to believe, even though he doesn't show himself to you?
No, I think he would. I think he will show himself to everybody, personally.
I feel like there's a lot of people who died who he hasn't, though.
But you don't know what happened after they died.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
but you just don't know what happened after they died. And then, of course, there's a lot of people who right on their deathbed have some kind of experience, and then a mystical experience, and then convert at the last moment. There are Muslims in this is being reported, like there's thousands of Muslims in the Middle East that are having these dreams of Jesus on the cross. I think there's a lot of different ways, and then I also think hell is not easily explainable by us. So the only thing I can say about hell, and that is because it is troubling, of course, is that I hope and pray for the salvation of all people. I know where salvation is. I don't know where salvation is not. Right? So that's... there's also Christians saying Allah sometimes. Yeah. How do you explain that? I haven't heard those accounts, but if there are, then yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that, to me, Allah, the description of Allah provided by Muhammad seems more like a devil than a god or a divine being. So yeah, do I think the devil can come to people in dreams? Of course.
Do you know how those people the Muslims who have those dreams and say they describe Jesus, though?
Well, I've only heard like 3 or 4 specific accounts. I've just heard that there are wide reports of it, but the ones that I've heard described are one Muslim was reading the Quran, and then he was reading the hadith, one of the major hadith. Yeah, Infamous, that's not proof. I'm just saying that was just a response to the question of why does God reveal himself to some people and not others. I think he reveals himself to lots of people is all I was responding to. Not that this is proof that God exists, that Muslims see Jesus on the cross. What was your question again? Oh, how do they see them? One Muslim said Jesus, he was reading the hadith in the Quran, and he was becoming more and more concerned about the God he was worshiping, and he prayed to Allah. He said, which is God to him, he said, if Jesus is the real Son of God and Christ is real, give me a dream of Christ on the cross, and if he's not, then give me a dream of you or Muhammad. And the dream he got was of Christ on the cross with 2 others beside him. And he had never read the Bible, so he had no idea that Christ was crucified with two others.
Okay.
So that was his
It-
testimony. I mean, of course, that doesn't
reason-
prove anything, but
The reason
sorry.
why I ask is because all the instances that I've heard, and I've heard a couple, including someone God Logic and other ones,
Right.
and they always describe Jesus as like a dude, like a guy with a white robe, but his whole face is like complete white, right? Like it's
Oh,
just
wow.
white light.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't see it. So, and do you know in Islam you can't draw the faces, right?
Right,
It's like
right.
You have to draw it like this white light.
Yeah.
So they see Jesus, not how a Christian would see it. I'm not saying like not, but typically in Christians you can see the face. Like we're not forbid from doing that. But the Muslims see Jesus how they are described in Islam. And so we also see like these other religions, they see these figures. Like I know that like in like he was saying, like you have some people who see Allah. And you have some like people in India who see like their gods, like Vishnu and
definitely,
all this
yeah,
stuff.
of course.
So
Yeah.
they're seeing it within their own cultural lens,
Totally.
which kind of makes it seem like it's more of like a human thing. Like I don't know what it would exactly be called, but some kind of thing with the brain that's happening to them.
No,
using their
totally.
own-
No, I totally agree. And again, I don't think that. Again, we kind of moved. We transmuted what I was saying into supposing to be a proof of God. I was just saying. I was responding to the point of why doesn't God reveal Himself to some people?
Yeah. Okay.
So
I didn't want to get you off topic.
No, man, that's a good point. So I think, I don't know who He reveals Himself to after you die. Like it could be literally everybody, and then you make the decision after you die. Like especially if you're in a position where you never, like you're from a foreign, not foreign, but like a remote tribe in Papua New Guinea or something like that, right? Like how could you? I mean, how could you, right? Or if you're from a time in history where that was not possible to know about Jesus and that. So yeah, I know where salvation is in this life, and I will encourage people to seek that in this life because it's super great. I mean, it just gives you peace of mind and something to really live for and have purpose for. And it can just help you. It can just be good for you on the day to day. But I don't know where salvation is not. Like I can't pretend to know who doesn't get saved, right? So I can't pretend to say like these people are going to hell, right? I'll never be marching outside of an abortion clinic with a picket fence being like, you're all going to hell. Even though I disagree with abortion, I would never do that because I just don't know what everything is about,
Yeah, so what I was gonna say is, wasn't there an apostle who like didn't believe that Jesus came back or anything? And
Yeah,
that Jesus
doubting
had a
Thomas.
So Thomas, right? So
Yeah.
Thomas doubted that Jesus, right? And Thomas got Jesus coming to him physically and showing him like, hey, look, put your hands through my whole my hands and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so he got that kind of explanation almost.
Yeah.
So do you think that Jesus would give everybody that explanation when they die? Like even the most hardcore atheists would be like, he dies. It's not because you can't force yourself to believe. So he dies. He doesn't believe,
Right.
but then Jesus reveals himself and asks him to submit to him.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concept. I think that is sort of how I hold it in my head, something like that, right? So like that, maybe we all get that moment that Thomas gets. Would be really
That's kind of my idea. If I was a Christian.
I wouldn't rely on it per se. Like if I were you, I would just because remember what Jesus says after Thomas does this. He says, "Blessed are you because you've seen and believed, but blessed are those who have not seen and believed." Actually, let's read the exact verse so I don't misquote it.
That's what I was going to say. So then, if he says that, then why doesn't he treat everybody else the same? Why is he playing favorites? It seems like he's playing favorites.
Well, I mean, again, it's like they're both blessed in heaven. Obviously, Thomas is a disciple. He's like the most honored. Got to be one of the most honored people in heaven.
But I mean, aren't we all supposed to be children of God? So shouldn't we also get that?
Yeah, and I think we
feel
would. It's kind of like. Well, like, are you questioning why there would be like different levels of sort of blessings in heaven or something like that?
No, I'm saying like why? Because Thomas doubted, and
Yeah.
Jesus, he got that literally Jesus coming to him. So is Thomas more important than every other human being? Because we don't get that chance.
Well, yeah,
And
I'm
like
just not sure we don't get that chance, to be honest.
Well, and that's what I was saying. But you were making the argument that we have to be careful because Jesus also says that after bless the people because they won't see or something.
Yeah,
So
I'm going to it now. It's John 20. Let's see. John 20:29. Okay. Let's read the context. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. See this? I read everything symbolically. I love exegesis and try to really understand every single word. So this is kind of what we're talking about. It's not like Thomas was not with them, like he rejected Christ or anything like that, or rejected but he just wasn't there. He just wasn't with them. Like he didn't see Jesus. He didn't get it. So this reminds me, this like calls to mind that like tribe in Papua New Guinea, or those people that were born in a way where they couldn't have learned in, I don't know, China or North Korea or something like that. This is already what I'm starting to think about when I read this.
I thought they told him, and he said like he didn't believe them.
Yeah. The other disciples therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the prints of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. So like Infamous said, this is a majorly agnostic statement, right? His brothers, his disciples have seen, they believed, but he's like, I need hard, material, physical evidence, right?
Exactly.
And after 8 days, again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut. So the idea is that he like sort of appeared, like teleported into the room, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. Then saith he to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. So what's happening here? First of all, something Jesus loves to do throughout the whole gospel, he reads Thomas's mind, or he hears something that he wasn't there to hear. And he tells him, Here's your physical evidence. You want physical evidence? Here it is. Reach hither thy finger. Behold my hands. Reach hither thy hand. Thrust it into my side. It's very specific to what he asked for what he needed. So if you needed a road to Damascus moment or something like that, I think you would get it. Or in some kind of afterlife scenario, I think you would get the most physical evidence that you could possibly desire. And be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. So the evidence was convincing. Or maybe he didn't even need to do that stuff. So. Right? And so Jesus saith unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Right? Okay, so he's not blessed because of that, but he goes, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Right? Makes sense. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. Because I think Jesus understands that a lot of people like me, and a lot of people in going forward, are not going to be able to thrust our hand into his bloody, or whatever, open wound in his side, right? Even if it's not bloody. Okay, so that's the end of that little story.
My argument is like,
But Thomas is still, but you have to remember the context. Thomas becomes a saint, a disciple, right? I mean, he is a disciple already, but he becomes a sanctified, glorified disciple of Christ. He spreads the word to kings. Well, we don't know what he would have done without the physical evidence, but the point here being, he asked for this physical evidence, he got it, and he's glorified. And so it's not wrong for people to ask for the physical evidence and to get it, per se. But it is sort of like a show of faith to not really need it that much.
You're right, that is a show of faith. But what I'm saying is like, if Thomas, right? Is that what we're talking about? Thomas needed physical evidence for it, like most people today. And Jesus came up to him and literally gave him physical evidence.
Yeah.
And then he became a saint. I mean, if Jesus came to me and gave me physical evidence, hell, I would be the biggest believer in the world.
Right.
And that's where me and Infamous disagree, because I saw in the comments Infamous said even if Jesus did that, he wouldn't believe.
Right.
And I was like, that's
right.
where I disagree. That's where I disagree. Because
Yeah.
if he did, I would believe. I'd be the biggest believer. I'd go on my knees. But the thing
Yeah.
is, I ask, but it doesn't happen.
Okay.
So why not? Why for Thomas, but not
Well,
me?
what kind of evidence do you like? What kind of evidence do you need, require, even ask for, like want?
I'd literally the smallest, man. I would be
Yeah.
okay if literally just God said, "Hey, yo, I'm here."
Just some kind of moment. Okay.
Literally.
Yeah.
But it never happens. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
why? Why don't I get that?
I'm not sure. That is a great question. That is a really great question.
Because it feels to me like he's playing favorites or something's going
No,
on
no. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, part of it might be he wants you to understand the philosophical side more, the scientific side. He might want you to have a different type of journey before you get to that moment. To me, I would say keep asking personally. I know that can be hard, or I know you might not want to, or you might even feel slighted by God. But I almost
the
a
truth.
sense, well, because you're also not supposed to test the Lord thy God, right? That's in the scripture. So if
Thomas did.
the reason, right? So it's not like you can't. It's not like but you can't expect if you're asking and expecting something out of God per se, then I don't think you would particularly get it. The moments I've heard that people convert due to some kind of like road to Damascus moment, and I can give you from my experience, it was I really don't know what I'm gonna get. Like I have a feeling you're out there or something like that. I really want you to be true, but I just don't know, and I'm so used to getting nothing that I just would expect to get nothing again. And it was at this very like valley, like this very bottom of like, you know what, this is the final time I'm gonna ask, pretty much, which you can't manufacture either. You can't like now after the stream get off and be like, all right, this is the last time, God, right? It has to be like this emotional sort of like pit, I think. But I don't know, but also maybe it's not even how you get converted at all, is by something like that. It could be something totally different. So I don't want to like presume that you will be converted. I pray for you. I feel like you will.
I hope I do.
Yeah, I hope you do
saying.
too. Yeah. And if I think the
wanted
fact
to
that you
say-
hope you do means you absolutely will, because God will never.
Yeah.
He's a good shepherd. He'll never leave one of his sheep.
I was gonna say the difference between you and me though is when you asked,
Yeah.
like you said, you got it.
Yeah.
The thing is
But I
did
asked
have
so
that
many
moment.
times. I asked hundreds of times before that.
Yeah, but you're presuming I didn't.
No, I know
And
you
I'm-
have. I know you
I'm
have. I just don't know
26
how many.
years
Maybe you
old,
need to ask 200
and
times or something.
I've done 2 deployments overseas, and I've done a
Yeah.
lot, and I've asked more than I can count.
Right.
The difference between you and me, though, is he went to you, he didn't go to me. So why is that?
That's a good question.
And so
That's
that's
a good
why
question.
I'm here. That's why I'm here, and you're there, because
Yeah.
it seems like he's playing favorites.
It's interesting.
Maybe he is. Who's to say he's not? I mean, he's God. He can do whatever the hell he wants, right?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. I mean, part of it is. It is interesting.
Because,
So you've.
like I said, I would accept.
Mhm.
I would accept. Give me a son, and I would accept 100%. And I was devoted for a very long time.
Right.
It is only recently that I've been like this.
Yeah.
And I've asked again and again and again, and I've kept faith, and I've gone
Yeah.
to church. And guess what? And you know what the craziest thing is? I still go to church. I go to church every Sunday.
Really? Wow.
Still do, 100%. I go with my girlfriend. We both go to church every Sunday.
Wow.
And she's a Christian. She's devoted and everything.
Yeah.
And I still don't see anything, bro. I try, but
And what happens
don't
when you,
know. It's
out of
crazy.
curiosity, what happens when you take the Eucharist, when you eat the body and blood of Christ?
What do you mean? What happens?
Do you feel
I
anything?
No. I mean, I
Yeah.
pray and I say like
Lord.
I even say, Lord, thank you for your sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
But do I feel anything? No.
Have you tried asking him for his authentic body and blood?
What do you mean?
Like when you're kneeling in front of the pastor or the priest or whatever kind of church you go to, and and it's about to come to you and your hands are out. Do you ever say in your heart and your mind a little bit? And I'm not saying like this is obvious or that you should do this or that this is like necessary or anything or it should be necessary. But have you ever tried just going like, Lord, give me your real body. Give me your real
I haven't
blood.
tried that.
Fill me up.
I haven't.
Like in a moment of just like, this could be
Weakness.
real. Yeah, like this, like flesh, like make it taste like flesh or something like that. Not like in a real, not in a creepy way.
No,
But
I
like,
understand what you're saying. I haven't
yeah.
tried that. And you know what? Next time I will.
Maybe give that a try. I don't know though. You know, this is a tough question. It's something I believe it's for the best that God would put you in this situation.
You know, I've thought maybe because, like I said, I'm very open-minded, and I am still a Christian at the end of the day. Like I can say, like I go between theism and Christianity. I do, but like at the very bottom, I still am. Like it's not easy just to leave that. You know what I mean? So I'm waiting, and I ask. So part of me sometimes feels like this is happening because I'm learning more because of this, because I'm going deep into knowledge to learn
Yeah,
and to understand.
definitely. Yeah.
I don't.
Well, and Real Human Being has a good point. He says, "What are God's goals?" I think knowing them would be kind of vital. I'm not. Yeah, I don't think we can ultimately. I mean, we know some of them. Sure, we can try. We can approximate. Wouldn't a more defensible position be that God wants you to seek out the truth instead of convincing you of a proposition being true? So it could be the case. So you were talking about deism. You still struggle with the problem of evil fundamentally. Maybe God wants you to really figure that out philosophically, like really come to your own kind of like intellectual conclusion about that. Or at least, and then for me, that's what I think he wanted. And I tried that and I couldn't. And I'm sure you have as well. And you also couldn't. But maybe, yeah, again, like maybe the journey is the point of the silence right now.
Hey, you know what? I mean, I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing, and
Right.
I keep asking, nothing happens. So I
Right,
don't know.
right,
We'll see.
right.
If one day I wake up and like some crazy stuff happens, you'll be the first one to know. But
Well, good. I'm glad. Well, I would be interested if you try that next time you take the Eucharist, because that is that's the moment that I feel closest to God always in my week. And I went to my friend's church and they didn't do it because it was like this kind of hippie, like New Age thing. They didn't read any scripture. They didn't mention that it was Lent one time or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just complaining. And I felt it felt bad not to get the Eucharist.
well, you're a
yeah.
human being. I follow the truth, dude. Like
Yeah.
I that's why I'm in between right now.
Right.
I
Right.
can't claim either side. Like I go
Yeah.
back and forth. Like I said, I
Yeah.
wouldn't consider myself a Christian, and then sometimes I do, and then sometimes I'm like I go back and forth because I'm in between.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's because I am trying to follow logic and truth to the best of my ability, and I don't know where that leads right now.
Yeah,
So
and I
we'll
think you're
see.
doing you have an open heart and an open mind, and I can tell you're a kind person. And yeah, I think like you said, it's like all you can do is just keep going, really. Keep doing what you're doing and follow your path wherever it takes you. And I do have faith that it's the Lord guiding you on this path, including the silence
yeah.
of him. But man, sometimes I
You
wish he
know-
would just like come down on a lightning bolt and a cloud and just declare himself to all of us. But
One crazy thing to me though, I'll
Yeah.
say this, is like it's crazy how like Islam and like Muhammad and like the cave
yeah.
and
Yeah.
all this is like almost like it's almost like it's like a demonic experience.
No,
dude.
it
It's
is.
like
It is.
holy crap, dude. Like
Yeah.
if something wanted to bring me to the faith, that's almost it, dude. Because it's like I kind of
Yeah.
see like the devil's work in like
Yeah.
Islam. Like it's
Yeah,
kinda
no,
weird.
for sure. And we can there I've been learning I have been learning about the Islamic, I think it's called the Islamic problem or the Islamic something. But essentially the claim is that in the Quran they're instructed to see the Torah and the Bible as genuine scripture, authentically revealed by God, to the prophets that revealed them, and Jesus being one of the prophets, and the Old Testament prophets being the others. But the Quran contradicts the Gospel and the Torah. Therefore, if if the Bible and the Torah are legitimate, then the Quran is false. And if the Bible and the Torah are illegitimate, then the Quran is false because it called them legitimate. So there's sort of this like problem baked in, which I've been learning about.
Hey, Infamous, what's up, man?
Yeah, what's up, Infamous? You're kind of muting and unmuting, but yeah, we can hear you when you're unmuted.
Yeah. I'm gonna push to talk.
Oh, push to talk. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing I do want to say
Mm-hmm.
is that a more concise way of viewing it is that the Bible says that the Bible is infallible, and the last word of God, and so
Inerrant, not yeah.
Like the Quran, and the Quran says two things, which is it is the next word of God and the last word of God, and that the Bible was wrong, but also that the previous words of God are ineffable. So,
yeah, but the Bible never contradicts the Torah. That's why the Old Testament is our Bible. But the Quran contradicts both of them.
well, I mean, Jews would disagree with you. Jesus would necessarily contradict the prophecies. Otherwise, the Jews would be Christian.
What about moral
Yeah.
inconsistency between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Yeah, you mentioned that before. That is interesting. I mean, it's unclear. I was going to bring up Mark, I think it was Mark 20, where we learn, or no, Mark 10. Yeah, here we go. Where Jesus is responding to sort of these like harsh seeming laws of the Old Testament that the Pharisees are presenting him with. And let me see if I can find it though. Wait, I had it up here. Mark 10:5. And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And Jesus answered and said unto them, for the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. So the idea that I get from that type of verse and others throughout the New Testament is that it was because humans were so inclined to do these horrible things that there were laws prescribed about how to go about those things, but that in no sense like permits them or condones them on God's part. Does that make any sense? And this is a big topic, so we could get into the Canaanite law, like the slaughter of the Canaanites and the Amalekites and all that. We can get into all that for sure. But I think Jesus's general attitude towards that, like seeming sort of the seeming, like, what did you call it again? The moral inconsistency between the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? Is that there's no moral inconsistency between.
Call it dissonance.
Oh, dissonance, sure, yeah.
Yeah, because they're not completely in conflation with each other. Like one isn't saying murder is okay, and the other is saying that fucking murder is wrong.
Sure, yeah.
You're right. You know what I'm saying, though.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. I think that's more of a minute.
I just like to be very specific with my
Yeah. Okay.
Hey,
so
I don't want to confuse it.
In terms of, I'm gonna just respond to dissonance or inconsistency, whatever you want to call it. I don't think there's any dissonance / inconsistency between God's own moral character, as Jesus is going to tell us here, but that there is a inconsistency between people's moral character and God's, which is exactly what you would expect. So when God himself comes and says, this is my moral character, that's why it's so beautiful. Whereas when he's just telling these people how to live in their society, he's responding to how hideously they're living. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
That's how I'd sort of see that.
I know Infamous said he had a question, so
go shoot, Infamous.
So my main thing that you've actually touched on here, and you were right that this is more of a big thing. Why did we deserve Jesus at that moment in time? Why is that the case? Because if anything, it's more of a worthy time for humanity to deserve Jesus Christ after the killing of the flood or Moses, right? Do you not think that that's more of a deserving time for Jesus to come and save humanity and forgive it?
After the flood? Well, no, because Noah's still messed up. He just happens to be the best guy at the time. So
let's not pretend like the Romans didn't exist at the time of Jesus.
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, they might have been even worse. I mean, so What is the
That
point?
is true.
They
Why
crucified
didn't
Jesus Christ.
why didn't Jesus come like after the flood? Why did he specifically come when
I
he
think
did?
for one
Yep.
thing, there would be no historical way to verify. Like, we wouldn't have nearly as much historical evidence for Jesus if he came that far ago. I think.
The reason I asked
But
is
we have
because
enough
more
historical,
people.
but we have enough historical evidence from Moses.
Well, I don't think we have great historical evidence for Moses either. I believe he existed
Do you
based
think
on the
Moses
faith. Yeah. What?
Okay, so you think he existed based on the faith?
Pretty
Okay,
much.
but
I
does
mean, I
it
think
not say
there's.
that you should believe in Jesus based on faith?
Well, you don't. I think you should believe in Jesus based on faith if you had no historical evidence. But luckily for us, we have like tons of historical evidence.
So if anything, it's even better to not have historical evidence, right? Because faith is the gift for those.
Well, now you're
for the
just
saint.
like now you're doing what the devil does in the desert, where you just take
But-
one little part of the passage and apply it to some other concept. But yeah, I mean,
Well, no, I'm just quoting one. I'm just quoting one.
yeah, you're quoting one
Can't
thing and
quote-
applying it to
can't
the whole
quote multiple-
context.
Because I can't quote multiple. Okay, I'm quoting one thing because I can't quote three things at the same time. That's all.
Okay, sure.
Don't you think that more people would have been saved though if Jesus came after the flood and had that forgiveness rather than when he did? More people.
Well,
would
I
have been
think
saved.
an equal number of people would have been saved because the righteous people after the flood, like we were talking about, like where there might be the situation after death where you can encounter Jesus and make that choice, are still saved. That's the idea, is that Jesus went to hell and emptied hell post facto.
So if an equal number of people would have been saved, why not do it earlier, which is objectively better? You're doing it so that less suffering happens.
I'm not sure.
Oh, I think I agree because think about it. Because the morality of Christianity would have come earlier, which means better thing. Like we would have had a better moral structure.
Okay.
Before the time of Jesus, pretty much.
Yeah, but what if we wanted the grand story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob
I mean,
and
none of
the
it
12
all
tribes of
matters.
Israel? What if
I feel
Jesus? I mean, to be fair, Jesus also is firmly nested within the Jewish tradition and is supposed to be a Davidic king. So that adds a whole, like, you guys are basically saying, what if we just deleted the
Why is that
story and started with Jesus? Like, sure, I guess that would be better. I mean,
No.
like,
I'm
I
not
don't.
saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm
Like,
not saying that.
yeah.
So obviously you need Jesus to do two things: one, fulfill prophecy, and two, forgive the sins of man.
Right.
So
So
it
there'd
needs
be
to happen
no
after the fall.
prophecy to have
It
been
needs to
fulfilled. Yeah.
And it needs to happen after the fall. It needs to happen at least after one or two prophecies, right?
Well,
Whatever.
yeah,
Being
sure.
The Messiah. So it comes after the Messiah prophecy. So it comes after Judaism. That's still earlier.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I did watch an interesting video about, hypothetically, the time where there was the most religious unsureness was right when Jesus came, as in when there were the widest variety. No, not really now, because now there's like basically, 35% of the earth are Christians, like another 10% are Muslims or whatever it is. I don't know the numbers. I'm just spitballing. So there's only like 5 major religions and then probably like, a couple hundred like pagan or lesser known religions or like, lower tier things,
If
mid-sized
you're talking
ones.
total population who believe in it, obviously there are more Christians now than there was Christians back
No,
then.
not
Jews
total.
back
I'm talking
then,
about
now
I'm talking about
then.
the spread of people. Like here, maybe I'll just have to find this video.
You're saying that there's more consolidated religions rather than 100 different micro religions everywhere.
Yeah,
Is that
like
what you're saying?
thousands and thousands of different micro religions back then.
Disagree with that. I would just disagree with that.
Okay.
So the main reason I would disagree with that is because how many sects of Christianity is there?
Yeah, a lot, for sure. But at
Okay,
least they're
those
all
are all
Christians.
different
Like that would be
religions.
they all
Fundamentally agree on
somewhat
different
agree with
things.
each other.
Sure, but like Judaism agrees somewhat with Christianity.
Yeah, and the opinion is that if you want to include Jews into the Christian salvation, I think that's fair.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is
Ish.
that, well, I mean, it has to because Christianity necessarily says that Jews will be saved.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
If we're saying that it's religious, like holistic, like holism, like I don't think that could be the argument either because right now there's more religion than there has ever been.
Really?
Absolutely. But the sects of all different forms of the Abrahamic religions all being considered different religions because they're different from each other.
Mm,
As Judaism is from Christianity.
yeah, I mean, no, I don't think that. But
Catholicism is not the same. Catholicism
The
is
core
not the same
beliefs
as
are the
the
same.
core
Though.
the core beliefs are
KKK.
exactly the same, even between Catholicism and like Baptists.
No. The KKK does not believe in same. The KKK does not believe in same Christianity. The Catholics believe it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's true. I guess if you want to go to the total fringe, like the most fringe things might be
Well, I'm
as
just saying,
different
like,
from the
that's
Catholics
total.
as the other.
That might be the total fringe. That might be the total fringe, but let's go 1 degree further. The Church of Latter-day Saints isn't the same as Protestants. Like we can.
Yeah, but they're not
keep
considered
picking
Christian.
these for age. Yeah, sure, they are still Christian, but I consider them as different religions because they're just as different from each other as like Islam is to Christianity, especially.
No.
Mormons,
I was saying
especially.
LDS isn't Christian. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I don't think LDS is.
I mean, technically they're Mormons, but they consider themselves Christian.
Yeah. I guess I see what you're saying. Wait, so what exactly is the point that Jesus should have come during Noah?
Well, no,
Or
so
you're
I
just
was
responding to my
saying
point that like because I'm really trying to find this
that it was
video
the
and I
most
can't find it.
divisive religious time of all time, and I'd say that's now. Because not only are we
Oh,
just
okay.
talking about Abrahamic faiths, which have divided so much that they're so different from Judaism, especially at the time, because like Christianity at Jesus' time was so similar to Judaism, it was almost indistinguishable except for the belief in him. That's the only difference. There's no
Right.
written documental differences. There's no like gospels, nothing. There's no specific differences.
Right.
In fact, if the only difference is to believe Jesus is Yahweh, that's it. That's the only difference.
Right.
Are you saying when Christianity was founded, it was not different?
When Christianity was founded, it was in fact the extension of Judaism. He was the Messiah. So it's not. It's actually just the extension of Judaism at the time. Obviously, the further it's gone on, it's diverged more. Obviously, we have the Bible, like we have the Gospel, the New Testament, right? Those make it very different. But those didn't exist.
Yeah, but I mean, Paul even said that they didn't need to get circumcised, which I would consider a pretty major difference from Judaism.
Oh, this is the video.
Sure, I agree. It's a pretty major difference in comparison to Judaism, but is it more different than Mormonism to Christianity?
Okay, this is the video I was talking about. Or I don't know if
In
this is
an
the video, but
interview
this is
with
the
Time
chart
Magazine.
I was talking about.
A lot cooler. We're just getting started. This is what I call the spiritual timeline, which is the main part of my argument. There are varying similarities among all of those gods I mentioned. So let's put them on a timeline and just see what happens. This is the timeline, roughly speaking, of the start and end of the worship of all of these deities. I'll start with Osiris, who is being worshipped from as early on as 3300 BC up until about 250 AD. Let's lay on top of that the timeline of Tammuz, the Mesopotamian god, to see if we can find a pattern starting.
Damn, people were worshiping him in
Then one by
1750.
one, we're going to put layer after layer of deity worship and see what happens. This timeline goes up until the modern day, by the way, so we can say that this timeline represents the general summary of the expectations of humanity of the divine from the earliest worshiping of a god until now. You can see that the largest number of these deities with similar characteristics were being worshipped within the time span of 350 BC.
What's that?
So they can feel a fallacy coming on.
Yeah.
To 380 AD. So what? What's the
Well, I don't think it's going to
importance?
prove anything, but it's just kind of food for thought about why he might have come at the exact time that he did.
Well, don't you think, with all these people thinking about God over the course of many thousands of years, that eventually they'd realize some true things about God, and eventually that God would meet their expectations? Well, if that's the case, this window is a great time for something to happen, because all these people are worshiping God all at the same time. So let's call this the red zone. Something great is likely to happen here because of the spiritual overlap. Only one problem.
Yeah.
I really want to know what his choice in region is now, because a random desert in the opposite end of the Middle Eastern world doesn't affect any of the East Asian religions.
Well, yeah, it does, because the disciples were sent to Asia. They were sent all over the world.
I'm talking about where he starts. I'm not talking about what he combats later. Like, why doesn't Jesus start in Japan? Why does he start in
Well, because he's a
China?
man, so he can't start everywhere. He has to choose somewhere.
I'm not saying for him to start everywhere. I'm saying for him to start in there instead of somewhere.
Yeah, maybe. That's a good point. Yeah, I guess we could analyze.
if we're to-
We
if
could
we're to
probably do the
apply
same
this-
chart
if
for
we're to apply this
where these religions are, and I'm not sure if they would all be. Well, technically, if you think about it, the Middle East, where he was, is essentially the middle of the known world at that time.
No, it wasn't.
You don't think so? What was the middle then?
There is no middle. That's my argument.
Yeah.
This argument is
No, I
that
understand. I
this
understand.
if this idea taken to
But this is
the
where the
time to make it to
Silk
space,
Road,
it's
like
not
if you're
doing
talking about travel and trade between what we commonly, I know it's not literal, but what we
he
call the
wandered
East
desert for
and the
40
West.
Years. You don't think he could have visited Japan?
Well, some crazies think he did, but no. But the disciples
some
did.
people think he
But
did.
eventually, like the world would be sort of colonized. But anyway, this isn't even about that. This is about. You're right. I understand there is a regional.
I would have showed up as Jesus when planes existed, so I could get everywhere.
Fair enough. Well, difference. But then you would have shown up in this non-red zone if you had done that, like way over here where barely anybody believes in God.
I completely disagree because then those religions would have died off and they didn't matter. I don't care what they think at that point because they don't exist anymore. So
The argument is about who expects God to be real.
Okay.
The argument is about what proportion of the society, of the world, global society, has any sort of like expectation or belief or openness to believe that there is a real God and that he interacts with the world. And then this red zone is meant to represent the part of the timeline where the absolute most people, highest proportion of the world, has expectations and thoughts about divinity. And so he would come to reveal himself
why does
in
that
that
matter
time.
though? Because a larger population of people expect God to exist now. There are more people than there have ever been. There are more religious people than there have ever been.
But not a
Not
larger
only that, there's more access to.
Yeah.
No, there absolutely is a larger proportion of people who are religious in the world. 100%. Like there are a lot of atheists in a lot of Western countries, but are you talking about third world countries which are grown massively?
Yeah.
Huge sizes. Let's
Yeah,
talk about India, for instance.
That's true.
India, its current pop dwarfs the whole Middle East at the time.
Yeah, there is a high expectation of divinity. True. But this is like the most this is the time when people are figuring out what that means. And so we've narrowed it down by now.
But not only that, he's using books. Instead of coming here when, like, arguably, at least you can agree that it's arguable that this might be a good time to show up. There's videos here. There's the internet. Send that shit across anywhere. You don't have to travel wherever you want. You can just send a video.
How could you trust a video? You wouldn't trust a video. If you saw a guy walking on water, I mean, I've seen that. I've seen David Blaine do that.
Investigate if videos are edited. There's ways to investigate if videos are edited, like pixel shit. There's easy ways to do that. That's what they do for court video.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same argument I was saying earlier. Is like, why? I guess it's the same argument as why doesn't God show himself now to us? You know,
Right,
so we would all
right. The divine
He
hiddenness.
seems very allergic to electronics.
I guess, yeah. Except that we're using electronics to talk about it right now. But anyway, fair enough.
Is he in the VC?
I think he is personally. I think he's in all of us in the VC. But so he's in me, which made me want to watch this video and even talk to you guys at all about this stuff. And I know he's in you, calling out.
Determining factor.
What's that?
I was just thinking that I figured out you're a determinist, except you believe that Jesus is the determining factor instead of cause and effect.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what people try to put on me, but I do believe in free will still. Fair enough.
No, I'm fucking with you.
Yeah. Okay, let's just finish the video because I'm actually interested now. I don't know exactly. I feel like it's going to go a little bit further. I'm not sure.
This window is about 700 years long. That's way too broad. Well, that brings us to reason number 2 for why Jesus had to come 2,000 years ago. Culture. All of these spiritual groups were worshiping God in their own ways, but with similarities, all around the same time. Can we think of anything else interesting that happened in this period of history? Well, a certain empire took over the region and set the table for something interesting. Rome conquered most of the known world by 146 BC, certainly all the area around the Mediterranean. They built an amazing system of roads to connect the empire, which meant that people and information could travel a lot faster than any time previously. They adopted the
You know what's a better empire that spreads information even?
Yeah, the internet, America. I know what you're saying. I get it. I get the point. Yeah, I get it. But that that wouldn't line up with the religious red zone, but fair enough. I understand your point. If you were trying to align both things, cultural and spiritual, then you still would have to go with Rome, I think. But
It is kind of crazy that the biggest empire at the time, Rome, at that time,
Mhm.
existed when Jesus was born, and he was born in that empire. It's pretty cool.
yeah, isn't that crazy?
I also think that the religion dead zone doesn't even matter because why do we care about, like, they're going to stop believing in this God. Jesus knows that, or well, God knows that, whatever.
Yeah.
So, like, why go there? They're going to stop believing. Who cares about the ones they're going to stop believing? Like, why even go into this dead zone?
Well, it's
Show a
from a narrative sense, he's he's essentially battling the most number of gods he possibly can. Like so that's exactly what happens in Exodus when
He's doomslayering faith.
He's what? Oh yeah, he's doomslayering faith. Exactly.
He's doomslayering faith.
Exactly.
Don't you think that
I
it
think
would
he
have
would
been
have shown up
better?
in Japan.
Don't you think it would have been better for Jesus to be born to like one of like the emperors of Rome, so he could become like the emperor of Rome and just make Christianity?
Oh my God, you're sounding like Jew.
Well, that's an interesting point, but I think it's really important that Jesus was born in the lowest possible position. So he subjected himself to the basest human experience, right?
Yeah, I'm just joking.
Yeah, also you're espousing an opinion that many scholars think that Judas had, and that's why he killed him.
Right,
Oh,
right.
really?
That was kind of like
Yeah, I
the
was
zealous.
just
You're not even.
No, yeah, I get you. But no, you're right.
I-
There's fun like kind of thought experience you can do. Oh, well, what if Jesus did this? I think it's more more interesting for a basically like lower class, like lowest possible person to then like for the ideology for really his church to then persuade by like reason and logic and revelation, to be clear, about the Roman Emperor Constantine. But like for the disciples and the faith and the tradition to then overturn the Roman Empire in the way that it did, I think is more powerful than what the Jews expected, which is for him to have like a political messianic rule where he is the Roman emperor. He's sort of like the cosmic emperor, which is cooler to me than the Roman emperor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he doesn't care about the earth. He cares about reality.
Right.
He cares about souls. He doesn't care about coin.
Right.
It's an extension of what the Messiah was viewed as by the Jews as even greater than what they viewed.
It's like
but
ramped up to 11.
The other thing I want to make sure, just so
Mhm.
we're getting it, because I know you get the argument, but I haven't really seen you admit to grasping it.
Yeah.
Do you think that this argument works better today? Like, I feel like this argument works infinitely better. No, okay, I'm not even exaggerating, but like it works better by magnitudes for today.
For today?
Because there's more religions today that like these, like for instance, you always mention like these new religious type bullshit, like the whole like fucking Wiccan stuff, the whole tarot shit, the whole astrological shit. Like there's huge amounts of like pseudo religions being created every day in modern day. I feel like this is way bigger than any of these
That
like,
might be
red zone ones.
That might be true.
Yeah,
Like,
it
so
sounds
we have
about
the
right.
amount of religions, we have the better transmission, we have a bigger empire. Like all of the factors he has in this video are more analogous to now than back then. So like either he's coming really soon, or either he's coming back really soon, or like he should have just come down.
We have something better than roads or planes. We have video recording now.
Right. Yeah, that's possible. I'll think about that as we continue watching the video. But yeah, it's definitely possible. I do think atheism has a higher proportion today than it ever has in history. So that already starts to. No.
You don't think atheism is more important than like belief? Because at least they believe.
Well, it's just one. I guess it's just one religion or something. But like.
Yeah, I mean, it would be viewed as like a belief. I don't think they actually care about religions. If we're talking about God, I think he cares about what people believe.
What people believe in. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. So
and if we're talking about it like that, there's more people than there's ever been.
Yeah, my intuition about your point about like all the new age, like, you know, where essentially each individual practices a different religion because it's like so subjective, right?
I don't want to go that far.
Okay, but I mean,
I think the furthest I would go is that each church believes in a different religion.
Yeah. I think each one of those has. Okay, so wherever you want to bring it, I would say it actually does typically come down to the individual. From my experience of being in it so heavily, because literally you just change around your beliefs no matter what, like depending on what you feel like per day. So it's almost like each individual has like 100 different religions over the course of 3 months, which is hilarious. But anyway, that's how I experienced it. That's how I know a lot of people do it. But
That's how I experienced it.
yeah,
Yeah. Also, sorry, Americans, for cutting you off every now and then.
Oh, dude, it's fine. I do the same thing. It's good, bro.
yeah, we're chilling. So maybe, but I would kind of just count New Age as like one religion because of that, because it's so ridiculously like
Right, but New Age
subjective.
Christianity isn't the same as New Age Islam.
No. I'm talking about New Age, like divorced from religion, like not New Age Christianity, New Age Islam. I'm talking about New Age. That's a thing itself, like New Age.
But
which
why
is,
are you making it that category when New Age Christianity and New Age Islam are significantly different from each other to warrant a difference?
because neither of those are New Age as I'm defining it. Like I don't think you understand what I mean by New Age. Maybe you haven't even experienced that. It's like
Billy Carson.
Billy Carson. It's
Yeah, I
like
was gonna
going
say
into
Billy
the
Carson is
desert
like
and
New Age
like, you know, hitting gongs and like meditating, but with absolutely no attacks to no doctrine or dogma. Today
Or
I'm a
even, like,
Buddhist,
Wiccan.
tomorrow I'm a
Wiccan
Hindu.
is literally a New
What's that?
like Wiccan is a New Age religion, for instance. Like, but Wicca existed before this.
Right.
It's very clearly different. Right? It involves
Yeah.
like fucking crystals and sometimes astrology.
Sure.
Which are religions of themselves.
Well, Wicca's
So,
a little different than what I'm
seems
thinking
like-
of, even because they're like somewhat doctrinal. Like they do specific things.
Yeah, but like okay, so I think that we do just have different views on what.
Yeah. I think I'm just defining it a little differently than probably you are. So
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, though. Yeah, I mean, I'll think about this. It is possible
I'll just use a
that
different word if necessary. I'm just going to say new.
just new.
Yeah, like new Wicca and like
New Wicca,
fucking
right.
New Christianity.
Yeah. There's a very specific thing, and it's probably I mean, it's happening, I'm sure, in Ireland and Europe in general, but in America especially, there's this like wave of like radical subjective spirituality, I guess you would call it, that we commonly call just New Age, and it's like basically the belief in everything rather than the belief in nothing.
It's like a lot to do with like energy and people's.
Yeah, it's like energy, and it's like, oh, the Hindu gods are all real, but Jesus is also real, and like they're all God because we're all God. I'm God, and you're God, and everybody's God, and my cat is God, and my desk is God, and like all that. It's like very.
The funny thing about that is that when I say that when you say that the universe needed a cause, you need to demonstrate that, and then when you say it's God, I'm like, you need to demonstrate that, and then when you throw it back to me, I'm like, do you think that it's just a blue fact?
Well, yeah, I guess you would have to demonstrate why you think they are brute facts. Is that what you're saying, or?
No, because if you say that the universe is a brute fact, it is almost like saying like, oh, we're all God, bro.
Oh yeah. No, literally, yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
Like, because if you're saying the universe is the reason for its own existence, you're like, we're all God.
We're all God, man, because things can create themselves and whatever, you know. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So let's just. I have a feeling. I'm just interested in how this goes.
A time of peace called Pax Romana that also lasted for over 200 years. Now our red zone is a lot smaller.
I'm gonna head
When you
out. Nice
combine the
talk.
general
All right, good shit,
spiritual
American.
depth
See
of
ya.
the known world and the
Nice meeting
power
you,
and
American.
invention of the Roman Empire, you get a lot smaller window of history where something very interesting could take place. However, there's still a window of over 200 years in which the true God could potentially make himself known with maximum impact. Now let's look at reason number 3 for why Jesus had to come over 2,000 years ago. Prophecy. Of course, all the other deities are being worshipped by other people, but the Jews had some kind of concept of God as well. Now you might wonder, okay, great, we've got all these spiritual groups worshiping God back then, and yes, the Roman Empire was powerful, but why couldn't Jesus have just shown up today?
Well,
Why
yep,
couldn't we
that's
just
what
take
we were
pictures
wondering.
of him and have him plaster his face on a billboard saying, I am God, worship me? Prophecy, that's why. The Jewish prophet Daniel said the Messiah would come after an edict to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and before the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. Well, there was a decree sent out by King Artaxerxes in 457 BC. And of course, everyone knows the temple was destroyed in 70 AD in the First Jewish-Roman War. All of a sudden, our red zone is extremely small. This timeline is over 5,000 years long, from 3300 BC to the 1900s in modern day. But we have a red zone that is 98 years long. That's from 29 BC, when Pax Romana began, up until 70 AD, when the Jewish temple was destroyed. Do you realize how small of a percentage of the timeline that is? That is 0.0188% of the timeline. I've expanded this timeline on the screen just to make it a little easier to see, but here's what it actually looks like as a percentage of history. It's a sliver. Even this doesn't do it justice. 0.0188% is nothing on this timeline. And yet, who happened to show up at this time? Jesus of Nazareth.
All right, Infamous. Good stuff. Yeah, it's about time for me to wrap up the stream as well. So that's interesting. Cool stuff. Glad everybody enjoyed. We had some good discussion and chats. And peace, everybody. It was fun.